pulled out of his testimony before the House Judiciary Committee on Thursday. Attorney General Barr answered questions from the Senate Judiciary Committee on how his office handled the release of the Mueller report and other investigations that resulted from the special counsel's investigation. This hour 45-minute portion of the hearing includes opening statements from the committee's leaders and the Attorney General.
Order of this is to try to cool the room down, so see if we can do that. But the Attorney General will be testifying here in a bit about the Mueller report. And I want to thank him for coming to the committee and giving us an explanation as to the actions he took and why he took them regarding the Mueller report. And here's the good news. Here's the Mueller report. You can read it for yourself. It's about 400 and something pages. Can't say I've read it all, but I've read most of it. There's an unredacted version over in the classified section of the Senate, a room where you can go look at the unredacted version, and I did that. I found it not to change anything in terms of an outcome, but a bit about the Mueller report. Who is Mueller? For those who may not know, I don't know where you've been, but you may not know, Bob Mueller has a reputation in this town and throughout the country as being an outstanding lawyer and a man of the law. He was the FBI director. He was the Deputy Attorney General. He was in charge of the Criminal Division at the Department of Justice. He was a United States Marine. And he has served this country in a variety of circumstances, long and well. For those who took time to read the report, I think it was well written, very thorough. And let me tell you what went into this report. There were 19 lawyers employed, approximately 40 FBI agents, intel analysts, forensic accountants, and other staff. 2,800 subpoenas issued, 500 witnesses interviewed, 500 search warrants executed, more than 230 orders for communication records so that records could be obtained, 13 requests from foreign governments for evidence, over $25 million spent over 2 years. We may not agree on much, but I hope we can agree that he had ample resources, took a lot of time, and talked to a lot of people. And you can read for yourself what he found. The Attorney General will tell us a bit about what his opinion of the report is. In terms of interacting with the White House turned over to Mr. Mueller 1.4 million documents and records, never asserted executive privilege one time. Over 20 White House staffers, including 8 from the White House counsel's office, were interviewed voluntarily. Don McGahn, chief counsel for the White House, was interviewed for over 30 hours. Everybody that they wanted to talk to from the Trump campaign on the ground, they were able to talk to. The president submitted himself to written interrogatories. So to the American people, Mr. Mueller was the right guy to do this job. I always believed that Attorney General Sessions was conflicted out because he was part of the campaign. He was the right guy with ample resources, and the cooperation he needed to find out what happened was given, in my view. But there were 2 campaigns in 2016, and we'll talk about the second one in a minute. So what have we learned from this report? time and all this money, Mr. Mueller and his team concluded there was no collusion. I didn't know. Like many of you here, on the Republican side, we all agreed that Mr. Mueller should be allowed to do his job without interference. I joined with my colleagues on the other side to introduce legislation to protect the special counsel that he can only be removed for cause. He was never removed. He was allowed to do his job. So, no collusion, no coordination, no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government regarding the 2016 election. As to obstruction of justice, Mr. Mueller left it to Mr. Barr to decide after 2 years and all this time. He said, Mr. Barr, you decide. Mr. Barr did. There are a bunch of lawyers on this committee, and I will tell you the following. You have to have specific intent to obstruct justice. If there's no underlying crime, it's pretty hard to figure out what intent might be if there was never a crime to begin with. The president never did anything to stop Mueller from doing his job. So I guess the theory goes now, okay, he didn't collude with the Russians and he didn't specifically do anything to stop Mueller, but attempted obstruction of justice of a crime that never occurred. I guess is sort of the new standard around here. We'll see if that makes any sense. To me, it doesn't. Now, there's another campaign. It was the Clinton campaign. What did we learn from this report? The Russians interfered in our election. So can some bipartisanship come out of this? I hope so. I intend to work with my colleagues on the other side to introduce the Deter Act and to introduce legislation to defend the integrity of the voting system. Senator Durbin and I have legislation that would deny anyone admittance into the United States a visa through the immigration system if they were involved in interfering in an American election. Working with Senator Whitehouse and Blumenthal to make sure that if you hack into a state election system, even though it's not tied to the internet, that's a crime. I would like to do more to harden our infrastructure because the Russians did it. It wasn't some 400-pound guy sitting on a bed somewhere. It was the Russians. And they're still doing it. And it could be the Chinese, it could be somebody next. So my takeaway from this report is that we've got a lot of work to do to defend democracy against the Russians and other bad actors. And I promise the committee we will get on with that work, hopefully in a bipartisan fashion. The other campaign was investigated not by Mr. Mueller, by people within the Department of Justice. The accusation against the Clinton, Secretary Clinton, was that she set a private server up somewhere in her house, and classified information was on it, to avoid the disclosure requirements and the transparency requirements required of being Secretary of State. So that was investigated. What do we know? We know that the person in charge of investigating hated Trump's guts. I don't know how Mr. Mueller felt about Trump, but I don't think anybody on our side believes that he had a personal animosity towards the president to the point he couldn't do his job. This is what Strzok said on February the 12th, 2016. Now, he's in charge of the Clinton email investigation. Oh, he's Trump's abysmal. I keep hoping the charade will end and people will just dump him. February the 12th, 2016. Page is the Department of Justice lawyer assigned to this case. March 3rd, 2016. God, Trump is a loathsome human being. Strzok. Oh my God. Trump's an idiot. Page, he's awful. Strzok. God, Hillary should win 100 million to nothing. Compare those two people to Mueller. March 16th, 2016. I cannot believe Trump is likely to be an actual serious candidate for president. July the 21st, 2016. Trump is a disaster. I have no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be. August the 8th, 2016. made deputy acting in charge of the counterintelligence division of the FBI. He's never going to become president, right? Page struck. No, he won't. We'll stop him. These are the people investigating the Clinton email situation and start the counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign. Compare them to Mueller. August the 15th, 2016. Struck. I want to believe the fact you threw out consideration in Andy's office that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. August 26, 2016. Just went to the Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. October the 19th, 2016. Trump is a fucking idiot. He's unable to provide a coherent answer. Sorry to the kids out there. These are the people that made a decision that Clinton didn't do anything wrong, and the counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign was working. We're going to, in a bipartisan way, I hope, deal with Russia. But when the Mueller report's put to bed, and it soon will be, this committee is going to look long and hard at how this all started. We're going to look at the FISA warrant process. Did Russia provide Christopher Steele the information about Trump that turned out to be garbage that was used to get a warrant on an American citizen? And if so, how did the system fail? Was there a real effort between Papadopoulos and anybody in Russia to use the Clinton emails stole by the Russians, or was that thought planted in his mind? I don't know, but we're going to look. And I can tell you this, if you change the name, y'all want to look too. Everything I just said, just substitute Clinton for Trump. See what all these people with cameras would be saying out here about this. As to cooperation in the Clinton investigation, I told you what the Trump people did. I'll tell you a little bit about what the Clinton people did. There was a protective order for the server issued by the House. There was a request by the State Department to preserve all the information on the server. Paul Gambetta, after having the protective order, used a software program called BleachBit to wipe this email server clean. Has anybody ever heard of Paul Gambetta? No. Under protective order from the House to preserve the information, under a request from the State Department to preserve the information on the server, he used a BleachBit program to wipe it clean. What happened to him? Nothing. 18 devices possessed by Secretary Clinton she used to do business as secretary. How many of them were turned over to the FBI? None. 2 of them could be turned over because Judith Casper took a hammer and destroyed 2 of them. What happened to her? So the bottom line is, we're about to hear from Mr. Barr the results of a 2-year investigation into the Trump campaign, all things Russia, the actions the president took before and after the campaign, $25 million, 40 FBI agents. I appreciate very much what Mr. Mueller did for the country. I have read most of the report. For me, it is over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Attorney General. On March 24th, you sent a letter to Chairman Graham and the ranking member of this committee, providing your summary of the principal conclusions set out in Special Counsel Mueller's report. This letter was widely reported as a win for the president and was characterized as confirming there was no conclusion. Following this letter, the White House put out a statement declaring the special counsel, and I quote, "The special counsel did not find any collusion and did not find any obstruction," end quote, and that the report, quote, "was a total and complete exoneration," end quote, of the president. However, last night, the Washington Post reported that Special Counsel Mueller sent you a letter in late March where he said your letter to Congress failed to, quote, "fully capture the context, nature, and substance of his office's work and conclusions," end quote, and that he spoke with you about the concern that the letter threatened to undermine the public confidence in the outcome of the investigations. That's in quotes as well. Then, on April 18th, you held a press conference where you announced repeatedly that the Mueller report found no collusion and no evidence of a crime. An hour later, a redacted copy of the Mueller report was provided to the public and the Congress, and we saw why Mueller was concerned. Contrary to the declarations of the total and complete exoneration, the special counsel's report contains substantial evidence of misconduct. First, Special Counsel Mueller's report confirms that the Russian government implemented a social media campaign to mislead millions of Americans, and that Russian intelligence services hacked into the DNC and the DCCC computers, stole emails and memos, and systematically released them to impact the presidential election. Your March letter stated that there was no evidence that the Trump campaign, quote, "conspired or coordinated with Russia," end quote. However, the report outlines substantial evidence that the Trump campaign welcomed, encouraged, and expected to benefit electorally from Russia's interference in the election. The Mueller report also details how time and time again the Trump campaign took steps to gain advantage from Russia's unlawful interference. For example, President Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, passed internal campaign polling data, messaging, and strategy updates to Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian national with ties to Russian intelligence. The Mueller report explains how Paul Manafort briefed Kilimnik in early August of 2016 on, and I quote, "the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election," end quote, including the campaign's focus on the battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Next, the Mueller report documents the Trump campaign's communications regarding Secretary Clinton's and the DNC's stolen emails. Specifically, the report states, and I quote, "within approximately 5 hours of President Trump calling on Russia to find Secretary Clinton's emails, Russian intelligence agency GRU officers, quote, targeted for the first time Clinton's personal office," end quote. The Mueller report also reveals that President Trump repeatedly asked individuals affiliated with his campaign, including Michael Flynn, quote, to find the deleted Clinton emails, end quote. These efforts included suggestions to contact foreign intelligence services, Russian hackers, and individuals on the dark web. The report confirms that Trump knew of WikiLeaks releases of the stolen emails and received status updates about upcoming releases, while his campaign promoted coverage of the leaks. Donald Trump Jr. communicated directly with WikiLeaks and at its request publicly tweeted a link to emails stolen from Clinton's campaign manager. Second, in your March letter to Congress, you concluded, and I quote, that the evidence is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense, end quote. However, Special Counsel Mueller methodically outlines 10 episodes, some continuing multiple actions by the president to mislead the American people and interfere with the investigations into Russian interference and obstruction. In one example, the president repeatedly called White House counsel Don McGahn at home and directed him to fire Mueller, saying, quote, "Mueller has to go. Call me back when you do it." Then later, the president repeatedly ordered McGahn to release a press statement and write a letter saying the president did not order Mueller fired. The Mueller report also outlines efforts by President Trump to influence witness testimony and deter cooperation with law enforcement. For example, the president's team communicated to witnesses that pardons would be available if they, quote, stayed on message, end quote, and remained, quote, on the team, end quote. In one case, the president sent messages through his personal lawyers to Paul Manafort that he would be taken care of and just, quote, sit tight, end quote. The president then publicly affirmed this communication by stating that Manafort was, quote, a brave man, end quote, for refusing to break. Similarly, the Mueller report stated the president used inducements in the form of positive messages in an effort to get Michael Cohen not to cooperate, and then turned to attacks and intimidation to deter the provision of information or undermine Cohen's credibility. Finally, while the March letter to Congress and the April press conference left the impression there were no remaining questions to examine, this report notes several limitations Mueller faced while gathering the facts that Congress needed to examine. More than once, the report documents that legal conclusions were not drawn because witnesses refused to answer questions or failed to recall the events. In addition, numerous witnesses, including but not limited to Jared Kushner, Sarah Sanders, Rudolph Giuliani, Michael Flynn, Steve Bannon, and John Kelly, all stated they could not recall events. The president himself said more than 30 times that he could not recall or remember enough to be able to answer written questions from the special counsel. The special counsel also recounted that, quote, some associated with the Trump campaign deleted relevant communications or communicated during the relevant period using applications that featured encryption or do not provide for long-term retention of data, end quote. Based on these gaps, the Mueller report concluded, and I quote again, the office cannot rule out the possibility that the unavailable information would have shed additional light on or cast a new light on events described in the report, end quote. And contrary to the conclusion that the special counsel's report did not find evidence of communication or coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia, the Mueller report explicitly states, and I quote, a statement that the investigation did not establish particular facts does not mean there was no evidence of those facts. Volume 2, page 2. Let me conclude with this. Congress has both the constitutional duty and the authority to investigate the serious findings contained in the Mueller report. I report in his March letter. I also believe senators should have the opportunity to ask him about these subjects in questions directly. I have requested this to our chairman to authorize a hearing with Special Counsel Mueller, and I hope that will happen soon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Before we receive your testimony, Mr. Barr, we have the letter Mr. Mueller sent to you on March 27th, 2019. I'll put that in the record now. What? That was very end. Sorry. Solemnly swear the testimony about to give this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, except for God. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Feinstein, members of the committee. During my confirmation process, there were two concerns that dominated, as I think you will all agree. The first was whether I would in any way impede or curtail Special Counsel Mueller's investigation, and the second, whether I would make public his final report. As you see, Bob Mueller was allowed to complete his work as he saw fit. And as to the report, even though the applicable regulations require that the report is to be made to the AG and is to remain confidential and not be made public, I told this committee that I intended to exercise whatever discretion I had to make as much of the report available to the public and to congressional leaders as I could, consistent with the law. This has been done. I arrived at the department on February 14th, and shortly thereafter I asked it to be communicated to Bob Mueller's team that in preparing the report, we requested that they make it so we could readily identify 6E material, so we could quickly process the report.
Did you tell the public what 6E is?
6E is grand jury materials that cannot be made public. It's prohibited by statute. And I wanted that identified so we could redact that material and prepare the report for public release as quickly as we could. When I arrived at the department, I found, and was eventually briefed in on the investigation, I found that the Deputy Attorney General and his principal associate deputy, Ed Callahan, were in regular discussions with the counsel's office, had been, and they communicated this request and had discussions about both the timing of the report and the nature of the report. On March 5th, I met with Bob at the suggestion of the deputy and the principal associate deputy, Bob Mueller. I met with Bob Mueller to get a readout on what his conclusions would be. On March 25th, and at that meeting, I reiterated to Special Counsel Mueller that in order to have the shortest possible time before I was in a position to release the report, I asked that they identify 6E material. When I received the report on March 22nd, and we were hoping to have that easily identify the 6E material, unfortunately, it did not come in that form. And it quickly became apparent that it would take about 3 or 4 weeks to identify that material and other material that had to be redacted. So there was necessarily going to be a gap between the receipt of the report and getting the full report out publicly. The deputy and I identified 4 categories of information that we believe required redaction. I think you all know of them, but they were the grand jury material, 6E material, information that the intelligence community advised to reveal sensitive sources and methods, information that if revealed at this stage would impinge on the investigation or prosecution of related cases, and information that would unfairly affect the privacy and reputational interests of peripheral third parties. We went about redacting this material in concert with the were all carried out by DOJ lawyers with special counsel lawyers in consultation with intelligence community. The report contained a substantial amount of material over which the president could have asserted executive privilege. But the president made the decision not to assert executive privilege and to make public as much of the report as we could, subject to the redactions that we thought required. Now, as you see, the report has been lightly redacted. The public version has been estimated to have only 10% redactions. Almost the vast bulk of those redactions relate to our Volume 1, which is a volume that deals with collusion, and it relates to existing ongoing cases. Volume 2 has only about 2% redactions for the public version, so 98% of Volume 2 dealing with obstruction is available to the public. We have made a version of the report available to congressional leaders that only contains redactions of grand jury material. For this version, overall redactions are less than 2% for the whole report, and for Volume 2, dealing with obstruction, they are less than 1/10 of 1%. So given the limited nature of redactions, I believe that the publicly released report will allow every American to understand the results of the special counsel's work. By now, everyone is familiar with the special counsel's bottom line conclusions about Russian attempts to interfere in the election. In Volume 1, the special counsel found that the Russians engaged in two distinct schemes. First, the Internet Research Agency, a Russian entity with close ties to the Russian government, conducted a disinformation and social media operation to sow discord among Americans. Second, the GRU, Russian military intelligence, hacked into computers and stole emails from individuals affiliated with the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton's campaign. The special counsel investigated whether anyone affiliated with President Trump's campaign conspired or coordinated with these criminal schemes. They concluded that there was not sufficient evidence to establish that there had been any conspiracy or coordination with the Russian government or the IRA. As you know, Volume 2 of his report dealt with obstruction, and the special counsel considered whether certain actions of the president could amount to obstruction. He decided not to reach a conclusion. Instead, the report recounts 10 episodes and discusses potential legal theories for connecting the president's actions to elements of obstruction offenses. And we first heard the special counsel's decision not to decide the obstruction issue at the March 5th meeting when he came over to the department, and we were frankly surprised that they were not going to reach a decision on obstruction. And we asked them why, the reasoning behind this and the basis for this. Special counsel Mueller stated 3 times to us in that meeting, in response to our questioning, that he emphatically was not saying that, but for the OLC opinion, he would have found obstruction. He said that in the future, the facts of the case against the president might be such that a special counsel would recommend abandoning the OLC opinion, but this is not such a case. We did not understand exactly why the special counsel was not reaching a decision. And when we pressed him on it, he said that his team was still formulating the explanation. Once we heard the special counsel was not reaching a conclusion on obstruction, the deputy and I discussed and agreed that the department had to reach a decision. We had the responsibility to assess the evidence and set forth in the report and to make the judgment. I say this because the special counsel was appointed to carry out the investigative and prosecutorial functions of the department and to do it as part of the Department of Justice. The powers he was using, including the power of using a grand jury and using compulsory process, exist for that purpose, the function of the Department of Justice in this arena, which is to determine whether or not there has been criminal conduct. It's a binary decision. Is there enough evidence to show a crime? And do we believe a crime has been committed? We I received on the 28th. When the report came in on the 22nd, and we saw it was going to take a great deal of time to get it out to the public, I made the determination that we had to put out some information about the bottom line. The body politic was in a high state of agitation. There's massive interest in learning what the bottom line results of Bob Mueller's investigation was, particularly as to collusion. Former government officials were confidently predicting that the president and members of his family were going to be indicted. There were people suggesting that if it took any time to turn around the report and get it out, it would mean that the president was in legal jeopardy. So I didn't feel that it was in the public interest to allow this to go on for several weeks without saying anything. And so I decided to simply state what the bottom line conclusions were, which is what the department normally does, make a binary determination. Is there a crime or isn't there a crime? We prepared the letter for that purpose, to state the bottom line conclusions. We used the language from the report to state those bottom line conclusions. I now decided to announcing after an extended trial what the verdict of the trial is, pending release of the full transcript. That's what we were trying to do, to notify the people as to the bottom line conclusion. We were not trying to summarize the 410-page report. So we released that. I offered Bob Mueller the opportunity to review that letter before it went out, and he declined. On Thursday morning, I received it, probably was received at the department Wednesday night or evening, but on Thursday morning I received a letter from Bob, the letter that's just been put into the record. And I called Bob and said, what's the issue here? I asked him if he was suggesting that the March 24th letter was inaccurate, and he said no, but that the press reporting had been inaccurate, and that the press was reading too much into it. And I asked him specifically what his concern was, and he said that his concern focused on his explanation of why he did not reach a conclusion on obstruction, and he wanted more put out on that issue. He argued for putting out summaries of each volume, the executive summaries that had been written by his office, and if not that, then other material that focused on the issue of why he didn't reach the obstruction question. But he was very clear with me that he was not suggesting that we had misrepresented his report. I told Bob that I was not interested in putting out summaries, and I wasn't going to put out the report piecemeal. I wanted to get the whole report out, and I thought summaries, by very definition, regardless of who prepared them, would be under-inclusive, and we'd have sort of a series of different debates and public discord over each tranche of information that went out, and I wanted to get everything out at once, and we should start working on that. And so the following day, I put out a letter explaining the process that we followed and stressing that the March 24th letter was not a summary of the report, but a statement of the principal conclusions, and that people would be able to see Bob Mueller's entire thinking of the report was made public. So I'll end my statement there, Mr. Chairman, and glad to take any questions.
Thank you very much. As to the actual report itself, was there ever an occasion where you wanted to, something was redacted from the report that Mr. Mueller objected to?
I would say objected to. My understanding is the categories were defined by me and the deputy. I don't think that I have no. I don't believe.
Work with him to redact the report.
Right. Those categories were executed by DOJ lawyers working with his lawyers. I think there were maybe a few judgment calls, very few, as to whether or not something as a prudential matter should be treated as a reputational interest or something. So there may have been some occasions of that, but as far
I
as
understand that you did not want to hurt somebody's reputation unless it really affected the outcome, is that correct? So was there any disagreement about 6E material?
not that I'm aware of.
Any disagreement about classified information?
Not that I'm aware of.
So, the conclusions in your fake 4-page summary, you think, accurately reflect his bottom line on collusion, is that correct?
Yes.
And you can read it for yourself if you got any doubt. As to obstruction of justice, were you surprised he was going to let you decide?
Yes, I was surprised. I think the function he was carrying out, the investigative and prosecutive function, is performed for the purpose of
People did he actually indict, you know?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
So he actually has the ability to indict if he wants to. He's used that power during the investigation, is that correct?
That's correct. And the other thing that was confusing to me is that the investigation carried on for a while as additional episodes were looked into, episodes involving the president. And so my question was, why were those investigated if at the end of the day you weren't going to reach a decision on them?
So did you consult Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein about the obstruction matter?
Constantly.
So was he in agreement with your decision not to proceed forward?
Yes. I'm sorry, you agree with what?
Not to proceed forward.
Right.
Obstruction. Okay. So very quickly, give us your reasoning why you think it would be inappropriate to proceed forward on obstruction of justice in this case.
Well, generally speaking, an obstruction case typically has two aspects to it. One is usually an underlying criminality.
Let's stop right there. Was there an underlying crime here?
No.
So usually there is.
But it's not necessary. But typically, sort of the paradigmatic case is there's an underlying crime, and then the person implicated or people implicated are concerned about that criminality being discovered, take an inherently malignant act, as the Supreme Court has said, to obstruct that investigation.
So
such
one
as
of the
destroying
examples
documents.
that people were worried about, they fired Comey to stop the Russian investigation. That's one of the concerns people had. Let me tell you a little bit about Comey. I do not have confidence in him, Comey, any longer. That was Chuck Schumer, November the 2nd, 2016. I think he, Comey, should take a hard look at what he has done, and I think it would not be a bad thing for the American people if he did step down Bernie Sanders January 15, 2017. The president ought to fire Comey immediately. He ought to initiate an investigation. That is Congressman Nadler, November 14, 2016. Did you have a problem with the way Comey handled the Clinton email investigation?
Yes, I said so at the time.
Okay. So, given the fact that a lot of people Comey should be fired, did you find that to be a persuasive act of obstructing justice?
No. I think even the report at the end of the day came to the conclusion, if you read the analysis, that a reason that loomed large there for his termination was his refusal to tell the public what he was privately telling the president, which was that the president was not under investigation.
As to where we go forward, as to how we go forward, would you recommend that this committee and every other committee of Congress do our best to harden our infrastructure against future Russian attacks?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you think Russia is still up to it?
Yes.
Do you think other countries may get involved in our elections in 2020?
Yes.
So you would support an effort by Congress working with the administration to harden our electoral infrastructure?
Yes.
Is that one of the takeaways of the Mueller report?
Yes.
You share my concerns about the FISA warrant process?
Yes.
You share my concerns about the counterintelligence investigation, how it was opened and why it was opened?
Yes.
You share my concerns that the lack of professionalism, the Clinton email investigation is something we should all look at?
Yes.
Do you expect to change your mind about the bottom line conclusions of the Mueller report?
No.
Do you know Bob Mueller?
Yes.
Do you trust him?
Yes.
How long have you known him?
30 years roughly.
Think he had the time you needed?
Yes.
Think he had the money you needed?
Yes.
Think he had the resources you needed?
Yes.
You think he did a thorough job?
Yes, I think he feels he did a thorough job and had adequate evidence to make the calls.
Do you think the president's campaign in 2016 was thoroughly looked at in terms of whether or not they colluded with the Russians?
Yes.
The answer is no, according to Bob Mueller.
That's right.
He couldn't decide about obstruction. You did. Is that correct?
That's right.
You feel good about your decision?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, Mr. Attorney General, the special counsel's report describes how the president directed White House counsel Don McGahn to fire special counsel Mueller, and later told McGahn to write a letter, quote, for our records, end quote, stating that the president had not ordered him to fire Mueller. The report also recounts how the president made repeated efforts to get McGahn to change his story. Knowing that McGahn believed the president's version of events was false, the special counsel found, and I quote, substantial evidence, end quote, that the president tried to change McGahn's account in order to prevent further scrutiny of the president towards the investigation. Special counsel also found that McGahn is a credible witness with no motive to lie or exaggerate, given the position he held in the White House. Here's the question. Does existing law prohibit efforts to get a witness to lie, to say something the witness believes is false?
Yes.
And,
Lying to the government.
and what law is that?
Obstruction statutes.
The obstruction statute. And you don't have it, I guess, before you.
Well, I'm not sure which one they were referring to here. It was probably 1512C2.
So these things, in effect, constitute obstruction.
Well, you're talking in general terms. You're not talking.
What I'm talking about specifically, yes, you're correct in a sense that it's substantial. The special counsel in his report found substantial evidence that the president tried to change McGahn's account in order to prevent, and this is the quote, further scrutiny of the president toward the investigation. And quote, the special counsel also found McGahn is a credible witness with no motive to lie or exaggerate. So what I'm asking you then, is that a credible charge under the obstruction statute?
We felt that episode, the government would not be able to establish obstruction. If you go back and if you look at the episode where the president gave McGahn an instruction, McGahn's version of that is quite clear each time he gave it, which is that the instruction said, go to Rosenstein, raise the issue of conflict of interest, and Mueller has to go because of this conflict of interest. So there's no question that whatever instruction was given McGahn had to do with Mueller's conflict of interest. Now, the president later said that what he meant was that the conflict of interest should be raised with Rosenstein, but the decision should be left with Rosenstein. On the other end of the spectrum, it appears that McGahn felt it was more directive and president was essentially saying, push Rosenstein to invoke a conflict of interest to push Mueller out. Wherever it fell on that spectrum of interest, the New York Times story was very different. The New York Times story said flat out that the president directed the firing of Mueller, told McGahn, fire Mueller. Now there's something very different between firing special counsel outright, which suggests ending the investigation, and having a special counsel removed for conflict, which suggests that you're going to have another special counsel. So the fact is that even under McGahn's, and then as the report says and recognizes, there is evidence the president truly felt that the Times article was inaccurate and he wanted McGahn to correct it. So we believe that it would be impossible for the government to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that the president understood that he was instructing McGahn to say something false, because it wasn't necessarily false. Moreover, McGahn had weeks before already given testimony to the special counsel, and the president was aware of that. And as the report indicates, it could also have been the case that what he was primarily concerned about press reports and making it clear that he never outright directed the firing of Mueller. So in terms of the request to ask McGahn to memorialize that fact, we do not think in this case that the government could show corrupt intent beyond a reasonable doubt.
Just to finish this, but you still have a situation where a president essentially tries to change the lawyer's account in order to prevent further criticism of himself.
Well, that's not a crime.
So you can, in this situation, instruct someone to lie.
No, it has to be, well, to be obstructionist.
Yeah.
Justice, the lie has to be tied to preparing the evidence in a particular proceeding. Again, I've already given this evidence, and I think it would be plausible that the purpose of McGahn memorializing what the president was asking was to make the record that the president never directed him to fire. And there is a distinction between saying to someone, go fire Mueller, and saying, have him removed based on conflict. They have different results. Well, the difference between them is if you remove someone for a conflict of interest, then there would be presumably another person appointed.
Yeah, but would you have to have it in this kind of situation, an identifiable conflict that made sense, or else doesn't it just become a fabrication?
Well, that was the shift on the issue of writing the memo or somehow putting out a release later on, and the issue of the actual direction to McGahn. So the question on the direction to McGahn has a number of different levels to it. And first, as a matter of law, I think the department's position would be that the president can direct the termination or the as a matter of law, the obstruction statute does not reach that conduct. Putting that aside, the next question would be, even if it reached the conduct, could you here establish corrupt intent beyond a reasonable doubt? What makes this case very interesting is that when you take away the fact that there was no underlying criminal conduct, and you take away the fact that there's no inherently malign obstructive act, that is, the president was carrying out his constitutional duties. The question is, what is the impact of taking away the underlying crime? It's not, as the report suggests, that one impact is, well, we have to find some other reason why the president would obstruct the investigation. But there's another impact, which is, if the president is being falsely accused, which the evidence now suggests that the accusations against him were false, and he knew they were false, and he felt that this investigation was unfair, propelled by his political opponents, and was hampering his ability to govern, that is not a corrupt motive for replacing an independent counsel. So that's another reason that we would say that the government would have difficulty proving this beyond a reasonable doubt.
Senator Press.
Senator Johnson and I wrote you about text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page that appear to show the FBI may have tried to use counterintelligence briefings for the Trump transition team as intelligence gathering operation. I hope you will commit to answering the letter in writing, but also providing committees the requested briefings. That's my question.
Yes, Senator.
Have you already asked any staff to look into whether spying by the FBI and other agencies on the Trump campaign was properly predicated? And can Congress expect a formal report on your findings?
Yes, I do have people in the department helping me review the activities over the summer of 2016.
I suppose it depends on what conclusions you come to, but is there any reason why Congress wouldn't be briefed on your conclusions?
Yeah, it's a little early for me to commit completely, but I envision some kind of reporting at the end of this.
The Clinton campaign and the Democrat National Committee hired Fusion GPS to do opposition research against candidate Trump. Fusion GPS then hired Christopher Steele, former British intelligence officer, to compile what we all know as the Steele dossier. That reportedly used Russian government sources for information. The Steele dossier was central to the now debunked collusion narrative. Now, here's the irony. The Mueller report spent millions investigating and found no collusion between Trump campaign and Russia. But the Democrats paid for a document created by a foreign national with reported foreign government sources. Not Trump, but the Democrats. That's the definition of collusion. Despite the central status of the Steele dossier to the collusion narrative, the Mueller report failed to analyze whether the dossier was filled with disinformation to mislead U.S. intelligence agencies and the FBI. My question, Mueller spent over 2 years, $30 million investigating Russian interference in the election. In order for a full accounting of Russian interference attempts, shouldn't the special counsel have considered on whether the Steele dossier was part of a Russian disinformation and interference campaign?
I don't. Special Counsel Mueller has put out his report, and I have not yet had anyone go through the full scope of his investigation. to determine whether he did address or look at all into those issues. One of the things I'm doing in my review is to try to assemble all the existing information out there about it, not only for Hill investigations and the OIG, but also to see what the special counsel looked into. So I really couldn't say what he actually looked into.
But you think, in other words, if you had looked at all that information right now, you're telling me you could have said yes or no to my question?
If I had looked at it,
And you're going to attempt to find some of this information if it's available.
yes.
Similarly, shouldn't the special counsel have looked into your origin of the FBI's investigation into alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia?
The origins of that narrative?
Yes.
I don't know if he viewed his charter that broadly. I don't know whether he did or not. That's something that I am reviewing. And again, we'll look at whatever the special counsel has developed on that.
In volume 2 of the report, the special counsel declined to make a judicial prosecutorial decision. Instead, the special counsel laid out 200 or so pages relating to a potential obstruction analysis and then dumped that on your desk. In your press conference, you said that you asked the special counsel whether he would have made a charging decision or recommended charges on obstruction, but for the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion on charging sitting presidents, and that the special counsel made clear that was not the case. So, Mr. Barr, is that an accurate description of your conversation with the special counsel?
Yes, he reiterated several times in a group meeting that he was not saying that but for the OLC opinion he would have found obstruction.
If the special counsel found facts sufficient to constitute obstruction of justice, would he have stated that fact?
If he had found that, I think he would state it, yes.
Was it special counsel Mueller's responsibility to make a charging recommendation?
I think the Deputy Attorney General and I thought it was, but not just charging, but to determine whether or not conduct was criminal. The President would be charged, could not be charged as long as he was in office.
Do you agree with the reasons that he offered for not making a decision in volume 2 of his report, and why or why not?
I'm not really sure of his reasoning. I really could not recapitulate his analysis, which is one of the reasons in my March 24th letter, I simply stated the fact that he did not reach a conclusion, and he didn't try to put words in his mouth. I think that if he felt that he shouldn't go down the path of making a traditional prosecutive decision, then he shouldn't have investigated. That was the time to pull up.
Okay. There have been a number of leaks coming out of the Justice Department and FBI during high-profile investigations. The Inspector General found that during the department's investigation of Hillary Clinton for mishandling highly classified information, there was a culture of unauthorized media contact. During the Russian investigation, the leaks continued. Leaks undermined the ability of investigators to investigate. Further leaks to the papers while Congress's questions to the department go unanswered is unacceptable. Why? What are you doing to investigate unauthorized media contacts by the department and FBI officials during the Russian investigation?
We have multiple criminal leak investigations underway. Senator Lake.
Somewhat troubled by your testimony here and in the other body. You appeared before the House Appropriations on April 9th. You were asked about media reports that trained the special counsel's team is frustrated that your March 24th letter didn't adequately portray the report's findings. When the Congressman agreed April 9th, that on March 27th, Robert Mueller wrote to you expressing very specific concern that your March 24th letter, your testimony on April 9th, that your March 24th letter failed to capture the quote, Mr. Mueller, the context, nature, and substance of the report of his report. And what really struck me, Mr. Mueller wrote that your letter threatened to undermine a central purpose of which the department appointed the special counsel to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigation. Why did you testify on April 9th that you didn't know the concerns being expressed by Mueller's team, when in fact you had heard those concerns directly from Mr. Mueller 2 weeks before?
Well, as I said, I talked directly to Bob Mueller about this letter to me and specifically asked him, what exactly are your concerns? Are you saying that the March 24th letter was misleading or inaccurate, or what? He indicated that it was not. He was not saying that, and that what he was concerned about...
That's my question.
Well, I'm getting to the question, which is the question from Chris was, reports have emerged recently, press reports, that members of the special counsel's team are frustrated at some level with the limited information included in your March 24th letter, in that they don't adequately or accurately portray the report's findings. I don't know what members he's talking about. I certainly am not aware of any challenge to the accuracy of the findings.
The senators do. My question was, why did you say you were not aware of concerns when weeks before your testimony, Mr. Mueller had expressed concerns to you? I mean, it's fairly simple.
Well, answer the question. The question was relating to unidentified members who were expressing frustration over the accuracy relating to findings. I don't know what that refers to at all. I talked directly to Bob Mueller, not members of his team. And even though I did not know what was being referred to, and Mueller had never told me that the expression of the findings was inaccurate, but I did then volunteer that I thought they were talking about the desire to have more information put out. But it wasn't my purpose to put out more.
I feel my answer was purposely misleading, and I think others do too. Let me ask you another one. You said the president fully cooperated with the investigation, but his attorney had told the defendant that he'd be taken care of if he didn't cooperate with the investigation. Is there a conflict in that?
So could you just repeat that?
Mr. Manafort, Mr. Cohen were told by Trump's personal attorney they'd be taken care of if they did not cooperate. You said that the president was fully cooperating. Is there a conflict there? Yes or no?
No.
You think it's fully cooperating to instruct a former aide to tell the Attorney General to unrecuse himself, shut down the investigation, and declare the president did nothing wrong?
I don't think, well, obviously since I didn't find there was obstruction, I felt that the evidence did not support
I'm
obstruction.
asking if that's fully cooperating. I'm not asking for that obstruction. Is that fully cooperating?
Yeah, he fully cooperated.
So by instructing a former aide to tell the Attorney General to unrecuse himself, shut down the investigation, and declare the president did nothing wrong, that's fully cooperating.
Where is that in the report?
That is on line 2, page 5. On June 19, 2017, the president dictated a message for Lewandowski delivered to Sessions. The message said that Sessions should publicly announce that notwithstanding the refusal from the Russian investigation, the investigation period fair to the president did nothing wrong.
Right. So,
Cooperating?
well, firstly, asking Sessions to unrecuse himself, we do not think is an obstruction.
The president did nothing wrong. I'm not asking if the president either, they're not cooperating.
I don't know if that declares the president did nothing wrong, although the president, in terms of collusion, did nothing wrong. Is that correct?
Well, collusion is not a crime, it's the obstructing, but is that fully cooperating?
Well, I don't see any conflict between that and fully cooperating with the investigation.
The president, of course, declared many times publicly in tweets and campaign rallies and all that he would testify. Well, he never did testify, right?
As far as I know.
But I think you know when he testified.
As far as I know, we did.
And Mr. Mueller found the written answers to be inadequate. Is that correct?
I think he wanted additional, but he never sought it.
And the president never testified.
Oh, he never pushed it.
The president never testified. Does the fact that Mr. Mueller found the Trump campaign was receptive to some of the offers of assistance from Russia, where the fact that the Trump campaign never reported any of this to the FBI, does that trouble you?
What would they report to the FBI?
That they were receptive to offers of assistance from Russia?
What do you mean by receptive? I think the report says, obviously,
Well,
obviously they were expecting the benefit from whatever the Russians.
173, the Volume 1 report says that some of the investigations found multiple links between Trump campaign officials and individuals tied to the Russian government. Those links included Russian officers of assistance to the campaign, and in some instances, the campaign was receptive to the offer, whereas others were not.
Well, I have to understand exactly what that refers to. What communications that refers to.
Well, you have the report. I just gave you the page of the report. And I know my time is up. I made it terribly nervous.
No, very well done. Senator Corn.
General Barr, the chairman has pointed out that after the Hillary Clinton email investigation, there were a number at Mr. Comey's press conference, I think it was July the 5th, roughly 2016, there were a number of prominent Democratic members of the Senate who said that Comey should resign or be fired. I believe you said that you've concluded as a matter of law that the president, as the head of the executive branch of government, has the right to fire executive branch employees. Is that correct?
That's right.
In this case, the president was relying, at least in part, on a recommendation by the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein,
Quindi secondo me ne ho follow
Rosenstein's critique of Mr. Comey's conduct holding that press conference, releasing derogatory information about Secretary Clinton, but then announcing that no reasonable prosecutor would bring charges against her. Is that right?
That's right.
You started your career, I believe, in the intelligence community, and then moved on, of course, to the Department of Justice. And thank you for agreeing to serve again as Attorney General and help restore the department's reputation as an impartial arbiter of the law and not as a political arm of any administration. I think that's very, very important that you and Director Wray continue your efforts in that regard, and I'm grateful to you for that. But I do believe that we need to ask the question, why didn't the Obama administration do more as early as 2014 in investigating Russian efforts to prepare to undermine and sow dissension in the 2016 election? Mr. Mueller's report does document that the Russian government, through their intelligence agencies and their Internet Research, or IRA, I think it's called, began as early as 2014, began their efforts to do so. And we know they met with some success. Is it any surprise to you, based on your experience, that the Russians would try to do everything they can to sow dissension in American political life, including in our elections?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the internet created kind of covert effect on American body politics. So it's getting more and more dangerous. But the Russians have been at this for a long time in various different ways. But the point you made about Bob Mueller's efforts on IRAs, that's one of the things that struck me about the report. I think it's very impressive work that they did in moving quickly to get into the IRA, and also the GRU folks. And I was thinking to myself, if that had been done in 2000, starting at the beginning of 2016, we would have been a lot further along.
For example, we've heard a lot about the Steele dossier. Mr. Steele, of course, is a former British intelligence officer hired by to do opposition research by the Hillary Clinton campaign on her political adversaries, including President Trump or candidate Trump at that time. How do we know that the Steele dossier is not itself evidence of Russian disinformation campaign, knowing what we know now, that basically the allegations made therein were secondhand, hearsay, or unverified? Can I state with confidence that the Steele dossier was not part of the Russian disinformation campaign?
No, I can't state that with confidence, and that is one of the areas that I'm reviewing. I'm concerned about it, and I don't think it's entirely speculative.
Well, we know that from published reports that the head of the CIA, Mr. Brennan, went to President Obama and brought his concerns about initial indications of Russian involvement in the campaign as early as the late July 2016. And instead of doing more during the Obama administration to look into that and disrupt and deter Russian activities that threatened the validity and integrity of our campaign in 2016, it appears to me that the Obama administration, Justice Department, and FBI decided to place their bets on Hillary Clinton and focus their efforts on investigating the Trump campaign. But as you have pointed out, thanks to the special counsel, we now have confidence that no Americans colluded with the Russians in their effort to undermine the American people. We now need to know, and I'm glad to hear what you're telling us about your inquiries and your research and your investigation. We now need to know what steps the Obama, FBI, Department of Justice, and intelligence community, what steps they took to undermine the political process and put a thumb on the scale in favor of one political candidate over the other, and that would be before and after the 2016 election. What's a defensive briefing that in a counterintelligence investigation?
Well, you can have different kinds of defensive briefings. If you learn that somebody is being targeted by a hostile intelligence service, then one form of defensive briefing is to go and to alert that person to the risks.
I think Attorney General Lynch has said it is routine in counterintelligence investigations. Would you agree with her?
Yes.
Do you know whether a defensive briefing was ever given to the Trump campaign by the FBI based on their counterintelligence investigation? Did they ever tell the president before he was January 2017 what the Russians were trying to do and advise him to tell people affiliated with his campaign to be on their guard and be vigilant about Russian efforts to undermine public confidence in the election?
My understanding is that didn't happen.
That would be that failure to provide a defensive briefing to the Trump campaign. That would be an extraordinary or notable failure. Would you agree?
I think under these circumstances, one of the things that I can't fathom why it did not happen. If you're concerned about interference in the election, and you have substantial people involved in the campaign were former U.S. attorneys. You had 3 former U.S. attorneys there in the campaign. I don't understand why the Bureau would not have gone and given a defensive briefing.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Jim Barr. I've been listening carefully to my public this is really not supposed to be about the Mueller investigation, the Russian involvement in the election, the Trump campaign, and so forth. It is really about Hillary Clinton's emails. Finally, we get down to the bottom line. Hillary Clinton's emails, questions that have to be asked about Benghazi, public way, about Travelgate, Whitewater. There's a lot of material that should be going through today, according to their response to this. That is totally unresponsive to the reality of what the American people want to know. They paid a lot of money, $25 million for this report. I respect Mr. Mueller and believe he came out with a sound report, though I don't agree with all of it. But I find, General Barr, that some of the things that you've engaged in really leave me wondering what you believe your role as Attorney General is when it comes to something like this. Listen to what, since putting the record, let me read it. Listen to what you received in a letter on March 27th from Bob Mueller. The summary letter the department sent to Congress, released in public late in the afternoon of March 24th, did not fully capture the context, nature, and substance of the Office's working conclusions. We communicated that concern to the department on the morning of March 25th. There is now public confusion about critical aspects of the results of our investigation. This threatens to undermine the central purpose for which the department appointed the special counsel, to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigations. I cannot imagine that you received that letter on March 24th and could not answer Congressman Chris directly when he asked you whether there were concerns about representations being made on these findings by the people working for Bob Mueller. You said, no, I don't know, after you received this letter. What am I missing?
Well, as I explained to Senator Leahy, I talked directly to Bob, and Bob told me that he did not have objections to the accuracy of
Attorneys don't put things in writing unless they're pretty serious about them. Look, there's an old rule in politics. A good politician doesn't write a letter and doesn't throw one away. So I got to ask you, if he puts it in writing, his concerns and your representations on March 24th, you couldn't recall that when Congressman Chris asked you that question a few days later?
No, I'm saying that this was the March 24th letter stated that Bob Mueller did not reach a conclusion on obstruction. And it had the language in there about not exonerating the president. My view of events was that there was a lot of criticism of the special counsel for the ensuing few days. And on Thursday, I got this letter. And when I talked to the special counsel about the letter, my understanding was his concern was not the accuracy of the statement of the findings in my letter, but that he wanted more out there to provide additional context to explain his reasoning on why he didn't reach a decision on obstruction.
I'll just say this, Mr. Warner. If you received a letter from Bob Mueller a few days after the March 24th letter, it was clear he had some genuine concerns about what you had said and done to that point. Can we move to another topic?
Yeah, his concerns was he wanted more out. And I would analogize it to this. After a months-long trial, if I wanted to go out and get out to the public what the verdict was, pending preparation of the full transcript, and I'm out there saying, here's the verdict, and the prosecutor comes up and pats me on the shoulder and says, well, the verdict doesn't really fully capture all my work. How about that great cross-examination I did, or how about that third day of trial where I did that? It doesn't capture everything. My answer to that is I'm not trying to capture everything. I'm just trying to state the verdict.
No, you just absolutely used the word summarize, though, in your letter.
Summarize the
Principal conclusions, which most people view as a summary. But let me move to another topic if I can for a minute. The Office of Legal Counsel's decision as to whether or not you can prosecute the sitting president, you had some pretty strong feelings that they were reflected in your volunteered memo to the Trump defense team, your 19-page memo.
Did I discuss that?
You certainly discussed whether or not the president should cooperate with an investigation. You said at one point in summarizing the findings of Mueller that the White House fully cooperated. You know for a fact, you stated already, the president never submitted himself to what was characterized as a vital interview, an actual sit-down interview under oath, not once, and that his questions that were answered some 30 times, his memory failed him. So to say the White House fully cooperated with that, I think is a generous conclusion. On this Office of Legal Counsel, I would refer you to this volume 2 of the Mueller report. And on page 1, he talks about the whole issue of whether or not he was in any way restricted in what he could conclude because of the outstanding Office of Legal Counsel opinion on the liability of a sitting president. You dismissed that in your opening statement. Said we asked him 2 or 3 times, you said that had nothing to do with it. Well, how do you explain on the first page of volume 2 that he says it had a lot to do with it? It's the reason he couldn't reach a binary conclusion on obstruction of justice.
Well, no, it was a prudential reason, one of the backdrop factors that he cited as influencing his prudential judgment that he should not reach a decision, which is different than citing the OLC, saying that but for the OLC opinion, I would have done it.
I'm just going to stand by what he has written, and I asked others to read it as well. The last point I want to make is about Don McGahn. If you read the section here, 100 pages, 113 to 120, on Don McGahn's experience, the president wanted him to state publicly that the New York Times article was untrue, that he had not asked McGahn to fire the special counsel. McGahn refused, and there's some speculation as to whether he risked being dismissed or even resigning over this issue. And for you to suggest that this was some sort of a kabuki dance with Rob Rosenstein, I think the president's intent here was very clear. He wanted this to end. He told Lester Holt, going back to the issue that was raised by the chairman earlier here, the reason to get rid of Comey is because of the Russian investigation. I mean, over and over again, this president was very explicit, and it was certainly very expository in style. So I don't understand. Let me ask you this. In conclusion, my time is up. Do you have any objections? Can you think of an objection to why Don McGahn shouldn't come testify before this committee about his experience?
Yes, I mean, I think that he's a close advisor to the president.
Ever exerted executive privilege?
Excuse me.
They may have already waived his.
No, we haven't.
Well, at this point, do you believe you're saying, Don, what about Bob Mueller? Should he be allowed to testify before this?
I've already said publicly, I have no objection to him.
And Don McGahn, should he be allowed to testify?
Well, that's a poll for the president.
Or is he a private citizen at this point?
Well, I would assume he'd be testifying about privileged matters.
Well, I would hope that we can get to the bottom of this with actual testimony of witnesses after we've taken another close look at Hillary Clinton's emails. Thank you.
Am I do that? Certainly.
In his classic dissent in Morrison v. Olson, Justice Scalia remarked that nothing is so politically effective as the ability to charge that one's opponent and his associates are not merely wrong-headed, naive, and ineffective, but in all probability crooks. And nothing so effective gives an appearance of validity to such charges as a Justice Department investigation. That observation has, I think, been borne out time and time again over the past 2 years. And time again, the president's political adversaries have exploited the Mueller probe, mere existence, to spread baseless innuendo in an effort to undermine the legitimacy of the 2016 election and the effectiveness of this administration. For example, on January 25th, 2019, Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked, what does Putin have on the president politically, personally, or financially? Mr. Attorney General, is there any evidence to suggest that Vladimir Putin, quote-unquote, has something on President Trump?
No, that I'm aware of.
On February 20th, 2019, former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe said on national television to the entire nation that he thinks it's possible that Donald Trump is a Russian agent. Mr. Attorney General, is there any evidence that you're aware of to suggest even remotely that President Trump is a Russian agent?
No, that I'm aware of.
Representative Eric Swalwell has repeatedly claimed that Donald Trump, quote, acts on Russia's behalf. Attorney General Barr, is there anything you're aware of? Back that up by way of evidence. The president acts on Russia's behalf.
None that I'm aware of.
Basically, we've heard over and over again on national TV, in committee hearings, on the House and Senate floor, and in the media. We've heard about the president's alleged collusion with Russia. But what what we have heard is as baseless as any conspiracy theory that we've seen in politics, any that I can think of. The only difference here is that the purveyors of this conspiracy were, in many cases, prominent members of the opposition party. That's concerning. Now, from the beginning, there were some indications that the Russia investigation was perhaps not always conducted with the absolute impartiality that the American people should expect and have come to hope to find in existence within the Department of Justice, especially given the track record of excellence that the U.S. Department of Justice has shown. According to the Mueller report itself, the investigation into the Trump campaign began on July 31st, 2016, after a foreign government contacted the FBI about comments made by George Papadopoulos. Is that accurate, or were there other precipitating events that helped lead to this?
That is the account that has been given in the past as to how it got going.
You previously said that you think it's possible that the Federal Bureau of Investigation improperly spied on the Trump campaign. I assume that's a reference to the FISA warrant for Carter Page. Is that what you have in mind, or are there other circumstances that you've got in mind there?
One of the things I want to look at, there are many people seem to assume that the only intelligence collection that occurred was a single confidential informant and a FISA warrant. I'd like to find out whether that is in fact true. It strikes me as a fairly anemic effort if that was the counterintelligence effort designed to stop the threat as it's being represented.
Was Carter Page under surveillance during his time working for the Trump campaign, which was roughly January 2016 to September 2016?
I don't know.
Was any other Trump campaign official under surveillance during that time period, do you know?
Well, these are the things that I need to look at. And I have to say that, as I said before, the extent that there was any overreach, I believe it was a few people in the upper echelons of the Bureau and perhaps the department. But those people are no longer there. And I'm working closely with Chris Wray, who I think has done a superb job at the Bureau. And we're working together on trying to reconstruct exactly what went down. One thing people should know is that the Bureau itself has been a little bit handicapped in looking back because of the pending Mueller investigation and the OIG investigation.
As we know, the FISA warrant for Carter Page was based largely on the so-called Steele dossier, and in particular on two specific facts about Page's trip to Moscow to deliver a speech in July 2016. First, according to the warrant, Page had a secret meeting with Igor Sechin, the president of Rosneft. The Mueller report confirmed that Page met with Sechin.
Met with who?
With Mr. Sechin, with Igor Sechin.
I can't recall that. I don't remember that. Let me just say that I want to stay away from getting too deeply into the FISA issue because that's currently under investigation by the OIG.
Understood. Second, and more importantly, the warrant also says that Page met with Igor Didyakin in order to discuss what is referred to as compromise involving Hillary Clinton, against Hillary Clinton. Does the Mueller report confirm that Page met with Didyakin?
I don't think so.
It confirmed that Page discussed compromise on Hillary Clinton with anyone?
Not that I recall.
So since the main evidentiary support for the warrant has been discussed by the Mueller report, which is sort of the gold standard of what we're discussing here, I'm glad that you're looking into it. I encourage you to look into why the FBI relied on this false information, and I hope you'll share the results. The public obviously has a right to know what happened here. The U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, have a long history, and a long history of success that's been based on respect. They deserve to understand that there's not so much power that's been concentrated in that one agency, that the outcome of an investigation can depend on the whims of who might be assigned to it. They have a right not to believe that a particular investigation might be struck and paged, might not be Carmack, might not be influenced by improper consideration, politically or otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General.
Senator Whitehouse, I'm told that 2 votes beginning at 11:45. We'll do Senator Whitehouse, and why don't we just come back an hour later? We'll break for an hour, and then do votes and have lunch. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Attorney General, you had a conversation with Chairman Graham earlier this morning, which described the importance of, to use Chairman Graham's words, hardening our electoral infrastructure against foreign election interference. I ask you, is anonymous election funding an avenue for possible foreign election influence and interference?
Yes.
Let's turn to the March 27th letter, which you received and read March 28th, the Mueller letter, correct?
Yes.
When did you have the conversation with Bob Mueller about that letter that you referenced?
I think it was on the 28th.
Same day that you read it. When did you first learn of the New York Times and Washington Post stories that would make the existence of this letter public, the ones that came out last night?
I think it could have been yesterday, but I'm not sure.
When they contacted you to ask for any comment?
They didn't contact me.
Contact DOJ? For any comment?
I can't actually remember how it came up, but someone mentioned it.
So you, at some point, you knew that the Mueller letter was going to become public, and that was probably yesterday.
I think so.
Okay. When did you decide to make that letter available to us in Congress?
This morning.
Would you concede that you had an opportunity to make this letter public on April 4th, when Representative Crisp asked you a very related question?
I don't know what you mean by related questions, but I think it'd be a very different question.
I can't even follow that down the road. Boy, that's a masterful hairspray. The letter references enclosed documents and enclosed materials, right? Are those the same things as what you call the executive summaries that Mueller provided you?
With this letter?
Yes.
Yes.
It's all the same document.
I'm sorry.
When you talk about the executive summaries that Mueller provided you, they are the documents that were the enclosed documents with that letter, which we have not been provided.
I think they were.
They
have been provided. There's a summaries in the report.
Is the language of the report in the report? There is nothing else that he provided you that?
I think that's what he provided.
Okay. If there is anything else that was provided to us, if it's different in any form, it's not to be given a letter without the attachment to it. When the attachment,
I think there was a redacted version of
we get that.
Summaries that are embedded in the report.
We get that, just to be sure.
Sure.
Great, thank you. You agree that none of that material was either grand jury 6E or presented a risk to intelligence sources and methods, or would interfere or compromise ongoing investigation, or were affected by executive privilege?
There were redactions made in the executive summaries. But as I said, I wasn't interested in putting out summaries, period.
Well, you know, and this is another hair-splitting exercise, because Bob Mueller, who I think we all agree is very credible, actually described the letter as a summary. So you can say it wasn't a summary, but Mueller said it was a summary. And I wasn't interested in summarizing the whole report. As I say, I was stating the bottom of the conclusions of the report. Your letter says that it's intended to describe. Sure. Yeah, describe the report in volume 1. Then you read the report in 4 pages, and it's a 4-page report. I don't know why you're talking about whether it's a summary. Because I state in the letter that I state the principal conclusions. Let me also say that Bob Mueller is the equivalent of the U.S. Attorney. He was exercising the powers of the Attorney General subject to supervision of the Attorney General. He's part of the Department of Justice. His work included when he sent his report to the Attorney General. At that point, it was my belief, and I was making a decision as to whether or not to make it public. I effectively overrode the regulation and used discretion to lean as far forward as I could to make that public. It was my decision how and when to make it public, not Bob Mueller's. With respect to the OLC opinion that informed Bob Mueller's decision as he describes in the report, you agree that that is merely an executive opinion and that under our Constitution the decision as to what the law is made by the judicial branch of the United States government. I'm sorry. With respect to the OLC opinion that informed Mueller's decision not to make a recommendation on obstruction, as he said in his report, you concede that that is an executive opinion and that under our constitutional system, what the law is decided by the judicial branch of government. Yes. Is there any way for the OLC's opinion to be tested by the judicial branch of government to see if it's correct or not? Something that comes to mind. And it could be wrong, could it not? I guess hypothetically it could be. And certainly there are respected legal minds that disagree with it, correct? There are many respected legal commentators and professors and lawyers who disagree with it, correct? It's very hard to find lawyers that agree with him on anything. So the interesting thing to me is that it goes on to say that because of the OLC opinion, we have to give the president an extra benefit of the doubt because he is denied his day in court where he could exonerate himself. That seems like fallacy to me, because if you are the president of the United States, you can either waive or readily override the OLC opinion and say, I'm ready to go to trial. I want to exonerate myself and let go. Could you not? That was just relevant to my decision. It's relevant because I assume that there was no OLC opinion. Well, we have a report in front of us that says that this influenced the outcome. And in particular, it says it influenced the outcome because it deprived the president of his ability to have a day in court. And my point to you is that the president could easily have a day in court by simply waiving or overriding this OLC opinion that has no judicial basis. Correct? Well, I don't think that there was anything to have a day in court on. I think that the government did not have a prosecutable case. But Mueller obviously didn't agree because he left that up to you. Well, he said that he could neither confirm nor deny that there was a prosecutable case, but he left that to you. And when he did, he said that you apparently would agree that this OLC opinion bears on it, and it would be unfair to the president to put him to the burden of being indicted and not having the ability to be charged. I don't want to characterize have Bob's thought process. I'm not asking you to characterize it. It's in his report. I'm not sure what you mean. With respect to the word, I have a minute. I just want to nail down, you use the word spying about authorized DOJ investigative activities. Are you talking about my testimony? Yeah, that has appropriations. Yes. In the entirety of your previous career in the Department of Justice, including as Attorney General, have you ever referred to authorized department investigative activities officially or publicly as spying? I'm not asking for private conversation. I'm not going to abjure the use of the word spying. I think, my first job was in CIA. I don't think the word spying has any pejorative connotation at all. To me, the question is always whether or not it's authorized and an adequate
been predicated, spying. I think spying is a good English word that in fact doesn't have because it's the broadest word, incorporating really all forms of covert intelligence collection. So I'm not going to back off the word spying, except I will say I'm not suggesting any regarding. Can I use it frequently? When I use media.
When did you decide to use it? Was it off the cuff in the hearing that day, or did you go into that hearing intending it was the
It was actually off the cuff, to tell you the truth, when Senator
Congressman probably?
Schatz from Hawaii.
Here.
No.
Whoever it was, go ahead.
Yeah, when he challenged me and said, you want to change your language, I was actually thinking, what's the issue? I don't consider it a pejorative. And frankly, we went back and looked at press usage, and up until all the law outlets a couple of weeks ago, it's commonly used in the press to refer to authorized activities such as.
So it is not commonly used by the department. It is not commonly used by the department.
It's commonly used by me.
Thank you very much. We'll come back at 10 to 1.
Following the break, lawmakers continued their questioning of the Attorney General. During this 2-hour, 15-minute portion, Mr. Barr took questions from Senators Hirono and Harris, who called for his resignation. At the end of the hearing, Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham said he would be contacting Mr. Mueller to discuss reports the special counsel disagreed with Mr. Barr's handling of the investigation's release.
Senator Cornyn asked me about defensive briefings before, and as I said, there were different kinds of them, and I was referring to the kind where you are told of a specific target or a specific target. I have been told at the break that a lesser kind of briefing, a security briefing that generally discusses general threats, apparently was given to the campaign in August.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to my colleagues for letting me go out of order. I promise to be as brief as possible. Mr. Chairman, General, thanks for coming today. Humans have a universal need, I think, to be listened to be understood, and to be validated. I think we all share that. I have listened to the Mueller team. I validate them, but I want to be sure I understand. Has Mr. Mueller or his team changed their conclusions?
You mean during the course of the investigation?
No, today. It's clear, at least according to the press report, that at one point the Mueller team was unhappy. I think it had to do with the election. What matters to me is, and I'll get to this in a moment, I want to know first, has the Mueller team changed its mind on its conclusions?
Conclusions as to what?
As to collusion, conspiracy, and conspiracy. So, the decision not to bring an indictment against the president for collusion, conspiracy with Russia has not changed. obstruction of justice has not changed.
No.
I take it from your testimony that the Mueller team was unhappy when you received the letter from Mr. Mueller.
I can't speak to the team as a whole.
All right,
Certainly,
Mr. Mueller,
when I talked to Bob Mueller, he indicated he was concerned about the press coverage that had gone on the previous few days, and he felt that was to be remedied by putting out more information.
okay. I understood you to say, and these are my words, not yours, the first concern that Mr. Mueller had, he felt like the letter wasn't nuanced enough.
Correct.
Okay. That problem's been solved, has it not?
Well, it was sort of solved by putting out the public report.
Exactly.
Which was that's why I think this whole thing is sort of mind-bendingly bizarre, because I made clear from the beginning that I was putting out the report, as much of the report as I could. And it was clear it was going to take 3 weeks or so, maybe 4, to do that. And the question is, what's the placeholder? And the placeholder, in my judgment, was the simple statement of what the bottom line conclusions were. And I wasn't going to be in the business of feeding out more and more information as time went on to adjust to what the press was saying.
And that's your call as Attorney General.
Absolutely.
Okay, that wouldn't be the call of a U.S. Attorney or a special counsel.
No, not at all.
Okay. Now, the second reason, I mentioned the nuance concern. The second reason that Mr. Mueller was concerned, I don't want to say unhappy, because I'm not trying to be pejorative. I say concerned. He was concerned about press coverage.
He indicated he felt that what was inaccurate was the press coverage and what they were interpreting the March 24th letter to say.
And what were you supposed to do about that?
He wanted to put out full executive summaries that are incorporated in the report. And I said to him I wasn't interested. And by the way, those summaries, even when he sent them, apparently, they actually required later more redactions with the intelligence community. So the fact is, we didn't have readily available summaries that had been fully vetted. But I made it clear to him I was not in the business of putting out periodic summaries, because the summary would start a whole public debate. It's by definition under-inclusive. And I thought what we should do is focus on getting the full report out as quickly as possible.
And which we did. And that's your call.
Of course,
Okay. And the news coverage issue, well, none of us can control what news publishes or prints, except the media. But to the extent that the argument that they didn't have the full report, that's a moot issue too now, isn't it?
yeah.
Okay. Can you briefly go over with me one more time? Well, I find it curious that the Mueller team spent all this time investigating obstruction of justice and then reached no conclusion. Tell me again briefly why Mr. Mueller told you he reached no conclusion, or he couldn't make up his mind, or whatever. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
I really couldn't recapitulate it. It was unclear to us. We first discussed it on March 5th. The deputy was with me, Ed O'Callahan, the principal associate deputy, and we didn't really get a clear understanding of the reasoning. And the report, I'm not sure exactly what the full line of reasoning is, and that's one of the reasons I didn't want to try to put words in Bob Mueller's mouth.
But he did not choose to bring an indictment. We know that much.
Right.
Regardless of the reason.
Right.
I'm going to repeat quickly in less than 1 minute what we talked about the last time you were here. This is one person's opinion. As I told you before, I think the FBI is the premier law enforcement agency in all of human history, and I believe that. I do think there were a handful of people, maybe some are still there, who decided in 2016 to act on their political beliefs. There were 2 investigations here. One was an investigation of Donald Trump. There was another investigation of Hillary Clinton. I'd like to know how that one started too. And it would seem to me that we all have a duty if not to the American people, to the FBI, to find out why these investigations were started, who started them, and the evidence on which they were started. And I hope you will do that, and you will get back to us. And there's another short way home here as well. All you got to do is release, the President can, release all the documents that the FBI and the Justice Department pertaining to the 2016 election. Now you can redact national security information, but just release it. Instead of us going through all this spin and innuendo and leaks and rumors, let's just let the American people see it. And the final point I'll make, when you're investigating leaks at the Department of Justice and the FBI, I hope you will include the Mueller team as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, I'm going to take us out of the weeds here because I think the American people deserve to know what happened in the election for the highest office of the land. And I'll just give my views very quickly and not ask you about these topics. I think your 4-page letter was clearly a summary, and that's why Director Mueller called it a summary. I think when Senator Van Hollen and Representative Chris asked you if the special counsel disagreed with you under oath, you had to go out of your way not to at least mention the fact that he had sent you this letter, if you didn't mention it. And then finally, I would say that we must hear from Director Mueller, because in response to some of my colleagues' questions, you have said that you didn't know what he meant or why he said it, and I believe we need to hear from him. So I want to first start with Russia. Special Counsel Mueller's report found that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a sweeping and systematic fashion. Later, Director Wray has informed us that 2018 was a dress rehearsal for the big show in 2020. Director Coates, the president's intelligence advisor, has told us that the Russians are getting bolder. Yet for the last 2 years, Senator Lankford and I had a bipartisan bill with support from the ranking and the head of the Intelligence Committee have been trying to get the Secure Elections Act passed. This would require backup paper ballots. If anyone gets federal funding for an election, it would require audits, and it would require better cooperation. Yet, the White House, just as we were on the verge of getting the markup in the Rules Committee, getting it to the floor where I can see the vast majority of senators, the White House made calls to stop this. Were you aware of that?
No.
Okay, well that happened. So what I would like to know from you as our nation's chief law enforcement officer, if you will work with Senator Lankford and I to get this bill done. Because otherwise we are not going to have any clout to get backup paper ballots if something goes wrong in this election.
Well, I will work with you to enhance the security of our election, and I'll take a look at what you're proposing. I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, well, it is the bipartisan bill. It has Senator Burr and Senator Warner. Support from Senator Graham was on the bill. Senator Harris is on the bill. And the leads are Senator Lankford and myself. And it had significant support in the House as well. The GRU, the Russian Military Intelligence Agency, part of the U.S. state and local agencies, along with private firms that are responsible for electronic polling and voter registration. The GRU accessed voter information and installed malware on a voting technology company's network. I understand the FBI will brief U.S. Senator Rick Scott and Florida Governor DeSantis on efforts by Russian hackers to gain access to Florida election data. Will you commit to have the FBI provide a briefing to all senators on this?
Just on the Florida situation?
On the entire Russia situation.
Sure.
Including the Florida situation. Okay, that will be helpful. Again, Senator Lankford and I are trying to get our bill passed, and I think if everyone hears about this, it may help. Also, according to the report, the IRA purchased over 3,500 ads on Facebook to undermine our democracy. As the chairman has pointed out, contrary to what we heard from a high-ranking official at the White House, this was not just a few Facebook ads. I'm pleased that Chairman Graham has agreed to be the lead Republican on the Honest Ads Act that I introduced last year with Senator McCain. And will you help us to try at least to change our election laws so that we can know where the money is coming from and who's paying for these ads so that people have access to these ads?
Concept, yes.
Okay, very good, thank you. We need that support. Now let's go to something I noted in your
in the opening, you talked about how the two major concerns at your nomination hearing were about the report and about making the report public. There was a third concern, and it was something I raised, and that was your views on obstruction. I asked you if a president or any person convincing a witness to change testimony would be obstruction of justice, and you said yes. The report found that Michael Cohen's testimony to the House before it, that the president repeatedly implied that Cohen's family members had committed crimes. Do you consider that evidence to be an attempt to convince a witness to change testimony?
No. I don't think that could pass muster. Those public statements he was making could pass muster of subordination.
But this is a man in the highest office, the most powerful job in our country, and he is basically, I'm trying to think how someone would react. I think of my colleagues here, if the President of the United States is implying, getting out there that your family members have committed a crime, but you don't consider that any attempt to change testimony.
Well, you have two different things. You have the question of whether there's an obstructive act, and then also whether or not it is a corrupt intent. I don't think general public statements like that we could show that they would have sufficiently probable effect to the Constitution.
Okay, well then let's go to some private statements. The report found that the president's personal counsel told Paul Manafort that he would be, quote, taken care of. This is in volume 2, page 123 to 24. That you don't consider obstruction of justice.
No, not standing alone. Both of us on both the same reasons.
And I think that is my point here.
What?
You look at the totality of the evidence. That's what I learned when I was in law school. You look at the totality of the evidence in a pattern here. Look at this. The report found that the president's personal counsel told Michael Cohen that if he stayed on message about the Trump Tower Moscow project, the president acted back. That's volume 2, page 140.
Right, but I think that the counsel acknowledged that it's unclear whether he was reflecting the president's statements on that.
Okay, the report found that after Manafort was convicted, the president himself called him a brave man for refusing to break.
Yeah, and that is not obstruction, because the president's statement, the evidence, I think, what the president's lawyers would say if it were ever actually joined, is that the president's statements about flipping are quite clear and express and uniformly the same, which is by flipping, he meant succumbing to pressure on unrelated cases to lie and compose in order to get lenient treatment on other cases. That is not, so discouraging flipping in that sense is not obstruction.
Okay, well, look at the pattern here. The report found that after Cohen's residence and office were searched by the FBI, the president told Cohen to hang in there and stay strong. The report found that after National Security Advisor Michael Flynn resigned, the president made public positive comments about him, and then when he cooperated, changed his tune. During your confirmation hearing, I asked you whether a president deliberately impairing the integrity or availability of evidence would be obstruction. And you responded yes. And this is a different take on Senator Feinstein's question. Would causing, again, the White House counsel to create a false record when the president ordered him to have when McGahn told him to deny reports, right? He told McGahn to deny reports that the president ordered to have the counsel fired. If you don't see that as obstruction and directing him to change testimony, do you think that would create a false record to impair the integrity of evidence?
It feels on the evidence would not be sufficient to establish any of the three elements there. First, it's not sufficient to show a obstructive act because it is unclear whether the president knew that to be false. In fact, the president's focus on the fact that I never told you to fire. Did I ever say fire? I never told you to fire McGahn. McGahn.
I'm getting at something. It's about impairing the I just see it as different. This is,
Well, the second thing is it's hard to establish the nexus to the proceeding because he already had testified to the special counsel. He's given his evidence. As the report itself says, there is evidence that the president actually thought and believed that the Times article was wrong. That's evidence on the president's side of the ledger. And he actually thought it was wrong and was asking for its correction. It is also possible, the report says, that the president's intent was directed at the publicity and the press. The government has to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt, and as the report shows, there's ample evidence on the other side of the ledger that would prevent the government from establishing it.
okay, again, I look at the totality of the evidence, and when you look at it, it is a pattern, and that is different than having one incident. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Senator Sachs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Barr, I'd like to go back to Russia, and your opening statement laid out some of what the GRU had done, what Russian military intelligence had done in terms of hacking. I'd also like to look at some of the oligarchs and some of the corruption so closely aligned with Putin. Volume 1, pages 129 to 144 are largely about Deripaska. Can you tell us who he is and what his objectives are?
I'd rather not get into that in this open setting.
Well, I'll at least quote the Department of Treasury because this is a public document. So, Oleg Deripaska is a designated individual. He possesses a Russian diplomatic passport. He regularly claims to represent the Russian government. He's an aluminum and other metals billionaire. He's been investigated by the U.S. government and by other of our allies for money laundering. He's been accused of threatening the lives of his business rivals. He's been charged with illegal wiretapping, taking part in extortion and racketeering schemes. He's bribed government officials. He's ordered the murder of a businessman, and he has many links to Russian organized crime. So I think we can, in an open setting, at least agree that he's a bad dude. Right? This is a bottom-feeding scum-sucker, and he has absolutely no, I'll take your laugh as agreement, he has absolutely no alignment with the interests of the U.S. people and our public. So the section of Volume 1 that deals with nominally Paul Manafort, but it's really about Deripaska, I would like you to help us have an American public 101 understanding of what is and isn't allowed. So Paul Manafort is hired by Deripaska ostensibly for things related to the Ukraine. They have a bunch of failed business ventures together, it looks like, over time. But he's on the payroll of a Russian oligarch that has interests completely misaligned with the American government, the American people, and with the interests of NATO. And he's on his payroll. Is it permissible for someone to be paid by somebody who's basically an enemy of the United States, and then could that individual just volunteer and start to donate their time and talent and expertise to a campaign in the U.S.? And I mean this, let me interrupt for a second. One of the things that I think is painfully tragic about hearing like this, I think the vast majority of the American people are going to tune it out, and those that pay attention are going to think the only two takeaways you need to know is a bunch of people were pro-Trump before they came, and they stayed pro-Trump, and a bunch of people were anti-Trump before they came, and they stayed anti-Trump, and we didn't dig into any of what the report actually says. I think these 448 pages say a whole bunch of really important things about intelligence operations against the United States people and our public and our government and our public trust. And I think it isn't just about 2016. There are important questions about 2016. Chairman Graham summarized at the beginning how much money and time was available to the special counsel and his team to do their work. So there are a bunch of factual matters about 2016 that matter. But if one of the most important things we take away from this isn't that we're going to be, it needs to be that we're going to be under attack again in 2020, and it isn't just going to be Russia, who's pretty dang clunky at this stuff, but it's also over time likely going to be China, who's going to be much more sophisticated about this stuff. Can you help us understand what is legal and illegal about foreign intelligence services being involved in U.S. elections, and what should American people and the American public, and especially American campaign operatives, know about what's appropriate and not appropriate to take in the form of help from foreign intelligence agencies?
That's a very broad topic, what is legal and illegal, but can you refine it a little bit? You're talking about what kind of propaganda, that kind of thing, coming into the country? Could you obviously you can't put money into foreign money, obviously, into a campaign.
Yeah, but could Russia, China, I'm making up a country, decide to come into the United States and look at all the political talent, make a database? By the way, the Opium Act in 2014 tells us the Chinese government is actively involved in creating databases of people they can potentially use as leverage against American citizens. More than 20 million people are already in the spy recruitment database of the Communist Party of China. Could they come in and build a database of all campaign operatives in the U.S. and some foreign entity just decide to hire all of them and then say, why don't you go and volunteer for this campaign and you go and volunteer for that campaign? Could we have campaign chairmen and women running around the U.S., U.S. citizens who have U.S. campaign talent and experience paid for by foreign entities just choosing to volunteer on campaigns going forward? Is that legal?
If their time is paid for the purpose of participating in a campaign, I would think it's legal.
But given how easy so much of this city is, and a whole bunch of people live on retainers of $15,000 and $20,000 and $30,000 a month, is it always obvious what you're paid for versus what you do? So some Russian oligarch has decided to start putting American campaign personnel on retainer payments and said, we may need you to lobby for something somewhere in the future. They've got views about oil pipelines and natural gas pipelines into Germany. We just hold you on retainer. And by the way, the fact that you're a person who likes to work for specific campaigns and certain parties and causes, feel free to go and occasionally do whatever the heck you want, whenever you want. Is that a place we should head? Is that allowed under U.S. law today?
Well, I mean, it depends on the specific circumstances, the nature of the agreement, who the person is representing. Are they representing the interests of the foreign government? Are they a foreign agent? Are they registered? I mean, it's a slippery area. We could sit here all day and without specific.
I only have 7 minutes. I don't get all day, but you're the chief law enforcement officer of the United States government, and I think it would be helpful for us to have a shared understanding as we head toward the 2020 election of what campaign operatives should well understand is beyond the pale. So if the Chinese government decides to start hacking into 2020 campaigns, I would hope there's clarity from the Department of Justice about whether or not Democratic presidential campaigns and whether or not the Trump re-election campaign are allowed to say, hey, we're interested in this hacked material going forward. I think we need to have clarity about a question like that. And I think as somebody who sits on Judiciary about the Intelligence Committee, I think there are a bunch of counterintelligence investigations happening right now in the United States where campaigns don't really understand what the laws are. And I think we need a lot more clarity about it. Because I know it's not let me at least give it to you as this version as a precise question. Under the Presidential Transitions Act, once you have a Democratic nominee for president and a Republican nominee for president, one of the things that we do is we start to brief them on, in the event that you would become the president-elect, you will need to know where we are in different national security issues. Should we be adding to the Presidential Transition Act counterintelligence briefings for campaigns as they become the nominee in a much more detailed way than the response you had about the Bureau's efforts when Senator Cornyn asked if defensive briefings were given? Should we, the Congress, be thinking very intensely about authorizing the ability of the Bureau, and in the shared broader IC context, but with the Bureau or Homeland Security probably being the interface entity, should nominees for the highest office in the land heading into 2020 be receiving regular counterintelligence briefings on the fact that foreign intelligence services are going to surround people that are likely going to be people of influence in principal offices of the United States government should they win?
Absolutely. I think the danger from countries like China, Russia, and so forth is far more insidious than it has been in the past because of non-traditional collectors that they have operating in the United States. And I think most people are unaware of how pervasive it is and what the risk level is. And I think it actually should go far beyond even campaigns. More people involved in government have to be educated on this.
Thank you. I'm at time, and I would love to work with you in the broader IC intelligence community on that more. I think there are a number of members of the CISI and the Senate Intelligence Committee who know what you're saying, particularly about the Chinese government and their attempt to encircle lots of people who are going to have influence in the future. And I think we, not just a whole government effort, but as a whole society effort, have to become much more sophisticated about what foreign intelligence services, and especially the Chinese, are plotting for the future.
Yeah, if I could just say that the pattern is whenever
on that demonstrable assault on our democracy and protect our elections going forward. I look forward to working with my colleagues, whether it's on sanctions bills or it's on the Langford-Klobuchar bill, but we genuinely need leadership from you, Mr. Attorney General, and from the White House. House and our President to make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect our next election. But frankly, we also can't ignore Volume 2 of this report, which I think details unacceptable conduct by the President and his campaign. And that includes trying to fire the special counsel without cause. I appreciated the leadership of Senators Graham and Tillis and Booker and I in a bill to try and protect the special counsel, something I think is still worth doing for future special counsels. We were told by many of our colleagues there was nothing to worry about because the President wasn't going to fire the special counsel, but I was particularly struck by some reports in the second volume that the President attempted to do exactly that. And I frankly, Mr. Attorney General, have concerns that your March 24 letter obscured that conduct, and as a result worked to protect the President for several weeks, rather than give the full truth to the American people, as I now believe Special Counsel Mueller was urging you to do, as reflected in the letter we just received today. So I'm going to ask you some questions about the report, but the bottom line is that I think we need to hear more about the Special Counsel's work from the Special Counsel. According to Special Counsel Mueller's report, in June of 2017, President Trump called White House Counsel McGahn and directed him to have the Special Counsel removed. And I quote, this is from about page 8586. McGahn recalled the President called McCollum twice, and on both occasions directed him to call Rosenstein and say that Mueller had conflicts and could no longer serve as Special Counsel. There were no credible conflicts. McGahn testified that he had shared that these conflicts were silly, were not real, and Chris Christie advised President Trump about this concern. There were no substantive basis, no good cause to fire the Special Counsel. In one call, the President said, call Rod, tell Rod Mueller has conflicts in his Special Counsel, but Mueller has to go. And I assume he didn't mean go to Cleveland or go to Seattle. He meant go, be fired. Call me back when you do it. I think the President's demands to fire Mueller without cause are alarming and unacceptable. And Mr. Attorney General, not one bit of what I just described was in your March 24th letter to this committee, was it?
No.
But it was in the summaries that were offered to you by Special Counsel Mueller and his team, which you chose not to release. Is that correct?
They were in complete form in the final report, which I was striving to make public, and which I did make public.
Which I respect and appreciate. But a critical 3 weeks passed between when you delivered the letter with the focus on the principal conclusions and when we ultimately got the redacted report. And what I take from the Mueller letter to
Why were they critical?
well, I think that the Volume 2 summary would have revealed to the general public a whole range of inappropriate actions by the President and his core team. I'll go to a second episode that I think is important. On February 5th of 2018, over a week after the story broke publicly, that the President ordered his White House counsel to fire the Special Counsel investigating the President. The President demanded that McGahn create a false record, saying the President never directed McGahn to fire the Special Counsel. The President wasn't looking for a press statement here. He wasn't looking to correct the record. He wanted a fraudulent record for White House records, a letter that wasn't true. McGahn refused to do it. Again, there's nothing about the President's request to create a false record in your March 24th letter, is there?
Well, that's your characterization of it. I've been through it a couple of times, and I think it would be difficult for the government to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. And an important thing, there are very plausible alternative explanations, but what I was trying to get out was the final report and have one issuance complete report. I made it clear in the March 24th letter that Bob Mueller didn't make the decision, but that he felt he could not exonerate the President. I wasn't hiding the ball on where Mueller was, and that he was presenting both sides of the issue, all the evidence, but he was not making the call, but he felt he couldn't exonerate the President. And then I briefly described the process we went through to make the judgment, internal to the Department of Justice. And as I say, from the public interest standpoint, I felt there should be only one thing issued, it should be the complete report, as complete as it could be.
And I know we differed in our conclusions about what that meant, but my concern is that that gave President Trump and his folks more than 3 weeks of an open field to say, I was completely exonerated. When had you released the summaries of it, the first and the second volume, we would have been more motivated than ever, based on the first volume, to work cooperatively to protect our next election, and more concerned than ever about misdeeds, about inappropriate actions by the president and by some of his core team as a result of the summary of the second volume. And at the end of the day, we've had a number of exchanges with colleagues who said, I can't tell you why Mueller chose not to charge. I want to hear that from Bob Mueller. I think we should hear from Special Counsel Mueller. Let me move on to a point that Senator Sass was just asking, but that I think is worth revisiting about foreign intelligence and their role in our elections. The reason we have this investigation in the first place was George Papadopoulos was told the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton. The Russians had a direct contact with Donald Trump Jr. and offered to give dirt about his father's opponent. Donald Trump Jr. said, I love it, and invited the campaign chairman and president's son-in-law to the campaign chairman to a meeting with the Russians to get it.
Who did you say offered it? Who did you say offered it?
In the second instance, it was Russians made an offer to Donald Trump. I have 30 seconds. Let me get to a question if I could. Going forward, what if a foreign adversary, let's now say North Korea, offers a presidential candidate dirt on a competitor in 2020? Do you agree with me the campaign should immediately contact the FBI? If a foreign intelligence service, a representative of a foreign government says, we have dirt on your opponent, should they say, I love it, let's meet? Or should they contact the FBI?
Foreign intelligence service does, yes.
Okay, here's my core concern. The president ordered the White House counsel to have Special Counsel Mueller fired. He fabricated evidence to cover it up. And whether or not you can make a criminal charge of this, it is unacceptable. And everyone who said we didn't have to worry about President Trump firing the special counsel was flat out wrong. The Russians offered the Trump campaign dirt on Hillary Clinton, and the Trump campaign never reported that to the FBI. Instead, they tried to conceal the meeting and misled the American people. And I think we have to work on a bipartisan basis going forward to protect our elections from a repeat of this, and we need your leadership and the president's. You somehow concluded the president didn't obstruct justice, and you announced that you had cleared the president 25 days before the public could read the Mueller report for themselves. I think it's no wonder Special Counsel Mueller thought your 4-page letter created public confusion about critical aspects of the results of the investigation, and that threatened to undermine the central purpose for which he was appointed. I think we need to hear from Special Counsel Mueller. I think we need to hear from Don McGahn, and I think we need to review how we are going to handle going forward the fact that you are supervising 12 ongoing cases that came out of the Mueller investigation and have been referred. This body has a central role in oversight that I believe we need to exercise, given your recent record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Martin, I commend your candor in calling what happened in 2016 what it is, which is spying the Trump campaign and spying on the President of the United States. Let's talk a little bit more about spying. Counterintelligence investigations like the one that we now know the FBI launched against candidate Trump and President Trump, those are designed to thwart spying and sabotage. Is that correct?
That's correct.
To your knowledge, has the FBI ever launched a counterintelligence investigation of another president that you're aware of?
Not to my knowledge.
So it's safe to say that to your knowledge, this move was completely unprecedented?
To my knowledge.
Would it be unusual, in your experience, to your knowledge, for FBI agents to hide the existence and results of an investigation, such an investigation, from their superiors?
Would you say, would it be typical?
No, would it be unusual?
Very unusual.
Yes. And in fact, that is what President would suggest happened here. When FBI officials hide investigations from superiors, is there anybody to hold them accountable? I mean, what happens in that instance?
There is no accountability.
Have you looked into the decision by the FBI into why they launched a counterintelligence investigation?
I am looking into it, and I have looked into it.
And you will you commit to telling us what you find as the result of your own review investigation?
Well, at the end of the day, when I form conclusions, I tend to share it.
I'll take that as a yes. Let me ask you about the 25th Amendment, if I might, for just a moment. We know that former acting director of the FBI, Andy McCabe, he's publicly confirmed that he contemplated forcing the president from office using the 25th Amendment. To your knowledge, have FBI officials ever contemplated forcing any other president from office you agree that that text contemplates physical ailments like a coma, mental incapacitation, not just political differences of opinion?
Yes.
Have you ever doubted, since you have been in your current position, whether this president is physically able, in the constitutional sense, to discharge his duties as president?
No.
Would you agree that discussions within the FBI of forcing the president out of office for political reasons give the public, at best, reason to question what the FBI is doing and to fear that there may be abuses of power in that organization?
I think it gives reason to be concerned about those particular individuals that were involved. I don't attribute it to the organization.
Speaking of particular individuals who are involved, I have to say, I listened to this testimony all day today, and to me, maybe the most shocking thing I've heard is this. Chairman read it earlier. August 26, 2016, this is a text message from Peter Strzok, a top counterintelligence investigator who we now know helped launch this counter-spy investigation of the President of the United States. Peter Strzok says, just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. Smell is capitalized. Just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. Mind you want to know what's really going on here? You want to know why the counterintelligence investigation really happened? You want to know why we're all really sitting here today? That's why, right there. It's because an unelected bureaucrat, an unelected official in this government, who clearly has open disdain, if not outright hatred, for Trump voters, like the people of my state, for instance. I could smell the Trump support, then tried to overturn the results of the Democratic election. That's what's really gone on here. That's the story. That's why we're here today. I cannot believe that a top official of this government, with the kind of power that these people have, would try to exercise their own prejudices, and that's what this is. It's open, blatant prejudice. Would try to use that in order to overturn these Democratic elections. And to my mind, that's the real crisis here. And it is a crisis, because if there's not accountability, if this can go on in the United States of America, then my goodness gracious, we don't have a democracy. So I appreciate your leadership, Mr. Attorney General. I look forward to hearing the results of your investigation, and I look forward to this committee continuing its constitutional responsibility to find out what is going on here and making sure that the will of the people is vindicated and established. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General, for being here today. You've been very adroit and agile in your responses to questions here. But I think history will judge you harshly and maybe a bit unfairly, because you seem to have been the designated fall guy for this report. And I think that conclusion is inescapable in light of the 4-page summary, and then the press conference you did on the day it was released, knowing that you had in hand a letter from the special counsel saying that he felt that you mischaracterized his report. And you were asked by one of my colleagues, Senator Van Hollen, whether you know, whether you knew that Bob Mueller supported your conclusion, and you said, I don't know whether Bob Mueller supported my conclusion. You were asked by Representative Chris, Senator, that conclusion was not related to my description of the findings in the March 25th letter. That conclusion refers to my conclusion on the obstruction. Well, so it's a different, exactly the same conclusions that was used by Special Counsel Mueller. And on the obstruction issue, at page 8 and 182 of the report, I don't know whether you have it in front of you, the Special Counsel specifically said, at the same time, I'm quoting, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the fact that the President clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. He said it again at page 182, and yet in your summary and in the press that you did, you in effect cleared the president on both so-called.
Yeah, and the difference is I use the proper standard. That statement you just read is actually a very strange statement.
On
four
of the specific obstruction episodes, Robert Mueller concluded that there was substantial evidence on the three necessary elements of obstruction. You're a prosecutor. I have to finish my question.
Well, you haven't let me finish my answer.
Well, let me just finish.
We can do both.
You ignored in that press conference and in the summary that Robert Mueller found substantial evidence, and it's in the report. And we have a chart that shows the elements of that crime: intent, interference with an ongoing investigation, and the obstructed act. So I think that your credibility is undermined within the department, in this committee, and with the American people. And I want to ask you whether on those remaining investigations, 12 to 14 investigations, whether you have had any communication with anyone in the White House.
No.
And will you give us an ironclad commitment that you will in no way...
I'm not sure the laundry list of investigations, but I certainly haven't talked the substance or been directed to do anything on it.
Well, let me give you an opportunity to clarify. Have you had any conversation with anyone in the White House about those ongoing investigations that were spawned or spun off by...
I don't recall having any substantive discussion on the investigation.
Have you had any non-substantive discussion?
I mean, it's possible that the name of the case was mentioned.
And have you provided information about any of those ongoing investigations? Any information whatsoever?
I don't recall. No.
You don't recall?
I don't recall providing any.
Wouldn't you recall about whether you gave information to somebody in the White House about an ongoing criminal investigation in the Southern District of New York, or the Eastern District of New York, or the Eastern District of Virginia, or the Department of Justice?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't recall providing any substantive information about a case.
Is there anything that would refresh your recollection?
I probably looked over a list of cases and thought that. But I don't recall.
You know what those investigations are. We've discussed them at your confirmation hearing, correct?
Whether, I think you 12 or 18 cases, right?
You don't know what those investigations are, Mr.
I do generally, but I can't remember each of them.
And let me ask you one last time. You can't recall whether you would discuss those cases with anyone in the White House, including the President of the United States.
My recollection is I have not discussed them.
But you don't recall for sure. I just... Let me move on.
I can say very surely I did not discuss the substance.
Will you recuse yourself from those investigations?
No.
Let me ask you about a couple of quotes from the President, since a number of my colleagues have raised the Russia investigation. And these are from the report, untruths recited by the report from the President in December of 2016, when President Trump was asked about the intelligence community's conclusion that Russia interfered in our election to boost Trump's chances. He said he had, quote, no idea if it's Russia, China, or somebody. It could be somebody sitting in a bed someplace.
400-pound person.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman?
400-pound person sitting on it.
That isn't what the President said. He referred to it as somebody. He also, at Helsinki, denied Russian attack in 2016 on our election. Another lie. 2 days after
President Trump was elected, Russian officials told the press that the Russian government had maintained contacts with Trump's, quote, immediate entourage, end quote, during the campaign. When President Trump was asked about it, he said, quote, there was no communication between the campaign and any foreign entity during the campaign. That's at page 21 of volume 2. The first quote I gave you was from page 21 of volume 2. The president initially denied playing any role in shaping his son's statement to the press about the now infamous June 9th meeting. The Mueller report established that the president dictated a misleading statement about that meeting to his communications director, Hope Hicks. That's at page 101 and 102 of volume 2. After news organizations reported that the president ordered Mr. McGahn, to have the special counsel removed, the president publicly disputed these accounts. The Mueller report establishes that, quote, substantial evidence supports the conclusion that the president, in fact, directed McGahn to call Rosenstein to have the special counsel removed. That's at volume 2, page 88. In your view, did President Trump, on those occasions and others recited in the report, lie to the American people?
Well, I'm not in the business of determining when lies are told to the American people. I'm in the business of determining whether a crime has been committed.
So he may have lied, but I'd like an opportunity to answer.
He started by citing this thing in volume 2 about how the report says that they could not be sure that they could clearly say that he did not violate the law. As you know, that's not the standard we use in the criminal justice system. It's presumed that someone is innocent, and the government has to prove that they clearly violated the law. We're not in the business of exoneration. We're not in the business of proving they didn't violate the law.
But I found that you had actually exonerated him in your press conference and in the 4-page summary.
How did that start? I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
You, in effect, exonerated or cleared the press.
No, I didn't exonerate. I said that we did not believe that there was sufficient evidence to establish an obstruction offense, which is the job of the Justice Department. And the job of the Justice Department is now over. That determines whether or not there's a crime. The report is now in the hands of the American people. Everyone can decide for themselves. There's an election in 18 months. That's a very democratic process. But we're out of it. So we have to stop using the criminal justice process as a political weapon. My time has expired. I apologize, Mr. Chairman, but I would just say that the 4-page letter and the press conference was clear. That's a clear impression, and it's been repeated again and again that you cleared the president.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Attorney General Barr, for being here today and visiting with all of us. The special counsel's investigation and all of the ripples that came from the 2016 presidential election have really permeated the country. I mean, there's great interest in this, and I went toward the 99 counties of Iowa. I am asked about this at town halls and other interactions with my constituents just as much as any other issue at hand. And I'm sure many of the other senators here have had the same experience. And I'd like to start today by visiting with you about the actions of Russia during the 2016 presidential election. I think that's where a lot of us would like to see the focus go. We need to focus on what happened in the 2016 election and then look ahead and make sure we are safeguarding our practices. So I think it's natural to think of acts of aggression by a foreign state in terms of bullets, terms of bombs. That's what we typically thought of, is acts of aggression. After all, up until just recent days, acts of aggression or warfare has been a symmetrical operation by a foreign adversary. In the past, it's been practiced by boots on the ground or various bombing campaigns. But that's not what we are facing today. And I do believe what we saw from Russia was an act of aggression. Other adversarial foreign states, not just Russia, but I think a number of colleagues have mentioned China as well, go on and on. Not only do they practice direct hostile military action, just as Russia did in Ukraine with its illegal annexation of Crimea, but as was detailed in the special counsel's report, they seek to influence the elections of our free states through cyber. And it is an objective fact that Russia attempted to influence our election. We know that, folks. All of us admit to that. We see the evidence that Russia tried to influence our election. The hacks, disinformation, and social media cyber attacks by Russia were done with the intent to sow discord among the American people. Russia will show no hesitation, and not in the past, they won't in the future, in using these types of acts of aggression in an attempt to undermine our elections process and our way of life. And it doesn't matter if the attack is coming from the end of a barrel of a gun or the click of a mouse. We have to get to the bottom of it. And so, General Barr, the past 2 years, we've been talking about this investigation in terms of what happened. And now we have the opportunity to decide how to do better. So the special counsel's report is the end of the road. I think many have stated that. The end of the road when it comes to the question of the Trump administration's intent, but it is just the beginning of the conversation on how we counter Russia and other foreign adversaries in their attempts to undermine our republic. So if we can talk about that 2016 presidential election, do you see vulnerabilities or weaknesses that existed at that time that left us open to foreign aggression, foreign influence in the election system? And then how do we move forward through the Department of Justice in making sure we're shoring up some of those avenues of approach of our foreign adversaries?
Yes. The FBI, has a very robust program, the Foreign Influence Task Force, which is focused on this problem and is working to counteract and prepare for the kinds of interference that we have seen. And it's a very dynamic program. I've been briefed on it by Chris Wray, and I'm very impressed with what they're up to. I think that the way I view this general problem is there has always been efforts by Russia and other hostile countries to influence American elections and public opinion, but it was more easily detectable, and it was sort of a cruder operation in the past. And what we have now is the technology and the democratization of information. The danger is far more insidious. And it enables not only them getting into effectively our whole communication system here in the United States, I mean just the way we communicate with each other, and into our business systems, our infrastructure. But it also allows them to do exactly what we've seen, which is because of our robust First Amendment freedoms, they're able to come in and pretend they're Americans and affect the dialogue and the social dynamics in the United States in a way that they've never been able to do before. And it's a huge challenge to deal with it, but I think the intelligence community is responding to the challenge and the threat. I think I had this discussion with Bob Mueller on March 5th when he was briefing me on his work and discussing lessons learned, what he has seen in dismantling the threats that he was able to detect, and how we can start using that approach across the board.
So I see we've accomplished a lot through our federal agencies and through the Department of Justice. Then, are we able to work with different social media giants, other private organizations to help counter some of this? Do you see that they are actually stepping up to this challenge, taking this on, and making sure that they are pushing back as well against what they might determine as a foreign adversary?
Yes, I think the private companies are stepping up their game and being more responsible in addressing it.
I think that's important. I'm sorry, go ahead, please. I just think it's important that we really focus on why we're here today, and that's because we did see Russian influence in our 2016 presidential election. What we need to make sure, as many of our other colleagues have noted, is that this doesn't happen to us again, and that we are aware, and as a public we are aware of what has been happening, not just in our own elections process here in the United States, but many of our allies around the globe as well, and making sure that we are adequately pushing back against that and even overmatching and making sure that we keep that type of influence out of our election cycle. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much, Chair Barr.
Senator Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barr, now the American people know that you are no different from Rudy Giuliani or Kellyanne Conway or any of the other people who sacrificed their once decent reputation for the grifter and liar who sits in the Oval Office. You once turned down a job offer from Donald Trump to represent him as his private attorney. At your confirmation hearing, you told Senator Feinstein that, quote, the job of Attorney General is not the same as representing, end quote, the president. So you know the difference, but you've chosen to be the president's lawyer and side with him over the interests of the American people. To start with, you should never have been involved in supervising the Robert Mueller investigation. You wrote a 19-page unsolicited memo, which you admit was not based on any facts, attacking the premise of half of the investigation. And you also should have insisted that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein recuse himself. He wasn't just a witness to some of the president's obstructive behavior. We now know he was in frequent personal contact with the president, a subject of the investigation. You should have left it to career officials. Then, once the report was delivered by the special counsel, you delayed its release for more than 2 weeks. You let the president's personal lawyers look at it before you even deigned to let Congress or the public see it. During the time, you substituted your own political judgment for the special counsel's legal conclusions in a 4-page letter to Congress. And now we know, thanks to a free press, that Mr. Mueller wrote your letter objecting to your so-called summary. When you called Mueller to discuss his letter, the reports are that he thought your summary was giving the press, Congress, and the public a misleading impression of his work. He asked you to release the report summary to correct the misimpression you created, but you refused. When you finally did decide to release the report over a congressional recess and on the eve of 2 major religious holidays, you called a press conference to once again try to clear Donald Trump before anyone had a chance to read the special counsel's report and come to their own conclusions. But when we read the report, we knew Robert Mueller's concerns were valid and that your version of events is false. You used every advantage of your office to create the impression that the president was cleared of misconduct. You selectively quoted fragments from the special counsel's report, taking some of the most important statements out of context and ignoring the rest. It was the power and authority of the Office of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice behind a public relations effort to help Donald Trump protect himself. Finally, you lied to Congress. You told Representative Charlie Crist that you didn't know what objections Mueller's team might have to your March 24th so-called summary. You told Senator Chris Van Hollen that you didn't know if Bob Mueller supported your conclusions. But you knew. You lied. And now we know. A lot of respected nonpartisan legal experts and elected officials were surprised by your efforts to protect the president. But I wasn't surprised. You did exactly what I thought you'd do. It's why I voted against your confirmation. I expected you would try to protect the president, and indeed you did. In 1989, this isn't something you hadn't done before. In 1989, when you refused to show Congress an OLC opinion that led to the arrest of Manuel Noriega. In 1989, this isn't something you hadn't done before. In 1989,
When you refused to show Congress an OLC opinion that led to the arrest of Manuel Noriega. In 1992, when you recommended pardons for the subjects of the Iran-Contra scandal. And last year, when you wrote the 19-page memo telling Donald Trump, as president, can't be guilty of obstruction of justice, and then didn't recuse yourself from the matter. From the beginning, you were addressing an audience of one, that person being Donald Trump. That's why, before the bombshell news of yesterday evening, 11 of my Senate colleagues and I called on the Department of Justice Inspector General and Office of Professional Responsibility to investigate the way you have handled the Mueller report. I wanted them to determine whether your actions have complied with the department's policies and practices, and whether you have demonstrated sufficient impartiality to continue to oversee the 14 other criminal matters that the special counsel referred to in other parts of the Department of Justice. But now, we know more about your deep involvement in trying to cover up for Donald Trump. Being Attorney General of the United States is a sacred trust. You have betrayed that trust. America deserves better. You should resign. I have some questions for you. Is the White House exerting any influence on your decision whether to allow Special Counsel Mueller to testify in Congress and when?
No.
Now, you've been clear today that you don't think that any of the 10 episodes of possible obstruction that the Special Counsel outlined is a crime. I disagree. But you seem to think that if it's not a crime, then there's no problem. Nothing to see here and to worry about. So, with apologies to Adam Schiff, do you think all of the things that President Trump did are okay? Are they what the President of the United States should be doing? For example, do you think it's okay for a president to fire an FBI director to stop him from investigating links between his campaign and Russia? It may not be a crime, but do you think it's okay?
Well, I think the report is clear that...
No, I'm not talking about the report and its analysis of whether a crime occurred. I'm asking you. This is not a crime, but do you think it's okay for the president to do what he did, to fire the special counsel to keep them from investigating?
He did, and I don't think the evidence supports the proposition.
So I guess you think it's okay.
To stop the investigation.
Do you think it's okay for a president to ask his White House counsel to lie?
Well, I'm going to talk about what's criminal.
No, we've already acknowledged that you think it was not a crime. I'm just asking whether you think it's okay. Even if it's not a crime, do you think it's okay for the president to ask his White House counsel to lie? Look, if you're just going to go back to whether or not it's a crime, you're telling me that it's okay. Let me ask you the last question that I have in 17 seconds. Do you think it's okay for a president to offer pardons to people who don't testify against him, to threaten the family of someone who does? Is that okay?
When did he offer a pardon to someone?
I think you know what I'm talking about. Please, Mr. Attorney General, give us some credit for knowing what the hell is going on around here with you.
Not really. To this line of questioning.
So,
listen, you slandered this man.
Yeah, what I sort of want to know is how do we get to this point?
I do not think that
how do we get to the point?
Anyone?
All I can say.
Mr. Chairman, I am done. Thank you very much.
You slandered this man from top to bottom. So, if you want more of this, you're not going to get it. If you want to ask some questions, you can.
Certainly have your opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Barr, for being here today. We really appreciate your time. I want to talk with you just a little bit about some of your bottom line conclusions, because I think there's one that we need to kind of circle back to a little bit. And as I've listened to a lot of the conversation here today, one of the things we've not discussed is what seems to be the culture at DOJ and the FBI. And I know there are a lot of good people that work there, and we're grateful for their service. But every organization has a culture. And whether it's a corporate culture or a church church or schools or whatever. And what seems to have happened at the FBI is there is a seedy, cynical, political culture within a group that developed. And these individuals collectively seem to think that they could work within the power of their jobs and their roles with the federal government. There was an elitism and an arrogance there, and it speaks to a very unhealthy work culture within that agency. And I will tell you this, when I talk to Tennesseans, they talk a lot about what they want to see with the Department of Justice and the FBI post all of this, and a restoration of trust and integrity and accountability. And really in Tennessee, they'll talk to me about four things. They talk a lot about health care, jobs in the economy. They're going to talk about getting federal judges confirmed and about reigning in government and holding it accountable. And there's been a lot of hysteria. This is something that grew within the ranks of the FBI. What are you doing and what is your plan for rebuilding that trust and integrity so that the American people can say, when the FBI does its job, when the DOJ does its job, we know that is a job done right?
I don't think there is a bad culture in the FBI, and I don't think the problems that manifested themselves during the 2016 election are endemic to the institution. I think the FBI is doing its job. I mean, just this recent case out in California where they interdicted this would-be bomber. They do great work around the country every day, and I agree with Senator Kennedy, who said, it's the premier law enforcement institution in the world. I believe that, and I say to the extent there was overreach, I don't want to judge people's motives and come to a conclusion on that, but to the extent there was overreach, what we have to be concerned about is a few people at the top getting it into their heads that they know better than the American people.
And that is the problem. And that is what we hope that you are you're addressing. Let's go back to this, because to repeat to the report, to produce it, I think that Mr. Mueller assembled what would be called a dream team, 19 all-star lawyers, a Watergate prosecutor, a deputy solicitor general, a fluent Russian speaker, who clerked for 2 Supreme Court justices, former head of the Enron Investigative Task Force, chief of the Public Corruption Unit in the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office, federal prosecutors who have taken down mob bosses, mafia, and ISIS terrorists. Do you consider these lawyers to be the best and the brightest in the field?
Not necessarily.
Are they the warriors you would want on your side in the courtroom?
There are a lot of great lawyers in the Department of Justice. He assembled a very competent team.
Are they meticulous investigators who will hunt down every witness and every piece of evidence?
I think they are tenacious investigators.
Are they devoted to finding the truth?
Yes.
Are they masters at taking down hardened criminals, foreign and domestic?
Yes.
If there were evidence to warrant a recommendation for collusion charges against the president, do you believe the special counsel team would have found it?
Yes.
And if there were evidence to warrant your recommendation for obstruction of justice charges against the president, do you believe the Mueller team would have found it?
I think that they haven't canvassed the evidence exhaustively on. They didn't reach a decision on it. But the question you've just been asking raises a point I wanted to say, which Senator Corona was talking, which is, how did we get to the point here where evidence is now that the president was falsely accused of colluding with the Russians and accused of being treasonous and accused of being a Russian agent, and the evidence now is that was without a basis. And 2 years of his administration have been dominated by the allegations that have now been proven false. And report had found the opposite.
And, Mr. Attorney General, I will tell you, that is what Tennesseans say. They say, how did we get here? How is there this allowance and acceptedness of saying, that's okay? Because it's not. And people want to see government held accountable. They want agencies to act with accountability to the American people. And they don't want to ever see this happen again. It doesn't matter if a candidate is a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. They never want to see this happen again because they know that this was pointed at using the power that they had to try to tilt an election or to achieve a different outcome. And the American people want equal justice, they want respect for the rule of law, and they want fairness from the system. I have one other question dealing with social media. Tennessee Republican Party had a @PN_GOP account that was set up by the Russians. And, either, I think as we look at social media, either they were willing to turn a blind eye and allow these accounts to go up because they knew they were being paid in rubles on some of these accounts, or there was just negligence. So my hope is that with all the bad actor states, whether it is Russia or Iran or North Korea or China, that you all have a game plan for dealing with these platforms in a way that you're going to recommend for the 2020 election. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bartlett, as I take a step back at this, I just really think we're at a very sobering moment in American history that there is a considerable amount going on. You actually take time and read this whole report that shows that we're sort of at a crossroad, and I fear that we're descending into a new normal that is dangerous for our democracy on a number of levels. And I fear, unfortunately, I hope we have a chance to discuss this, that you not only put your own credibility into question, but seem to be giving sanction to behavior through the language you used in that press conference you held, the language you used in your summary that stimulated Mueller to write such a strong rebuking letter. I fear that you are adding normalcy to a point where we should be sounding alarms as opposed to saying that there's nothing to see here. And so this 448-page report that has a deep litany of lies and deceit and misconduct of President of the United States instructing people to lie and be deceitful, evidence of people trying to cover up behavior that on its face is morally wrong, whatever the legal standard is. I found it, number one, by saying that this kind of obstructive conduct was acceptable, not only acceptable, but your sentence literally saying that the American people should be grateful for it. That is the beginning of normalization that I want to explore. But the second thing I want to explore, and we'll explore this, but I want to make my statements at the top. One, that's problematic. And General, the second problem I have is that you seem to be excusing a campaign that literally had hundreds of contacts with a foreign adversary that I think is a conclusion amongst, and a bipartisan conclusion, that there was a failure to even report those contacts. They'll be engaged in behaviors that the folks knew that were wrong, that they tried to actively hide. That they seem to capitalize on this foreign interference. I mean, in our country, we know it is illegal for a campaign and wrong for a campaign to share polling data with an American super PAC. But we have here documented a level of coordination with a foreign adversary sharing polling data. And we seem to be, and your conduct seems to be, trying to normalize that behavior. And that's why I think we are in such a serious moment that is eroding the cultures of this democracy and the security of this democracy. So let's just get into some of this specifically. You said, quote, "We know that the Russian operatives who perpetrated these schemes
did not have the cooperation of President Trump or the Trump campaign. That is something that all Americans can and should be grateful to have confirmed. The things I just mentioned, a willingness to meet with Russian operatives in order to capitalize on information, I don't think that's something that should be grateful. I find your choice of words alarming. I think it calls into question your objectivity when you look at the actual context of the report. And so should the American people really be grateful that a candidate for president sought to benefit from material and information that was stolen by a foreign power in an effort to influence an election?
I'm not sure what you mean by seek to benefit. There's no indication that they engaged in either the conspiracy to hack or that they engaged in any action with respect to the dissemination that was criminal.
Well, again, sir, you're using the word conspiracy, which is a legal term. In that press conference, you used President Trump's words, obstruction, over and over again, pulling. Well, sir, you pulled into his words, and I'm asking you specifically. I'm sorry, collusion was the word I was looking for. You used the word no collusion over and over again. And you said the American people should be grateful that the president sought to benefit from material and information. But you know they did seek to benefit from that material. Donald Trump Jr. in his own email seemed to celebrate that he might have access to information from a foreign adversary. Is that correct? That's something the American people should be grateful for.
Apparently, according to the report, he was apparently he was interested in seeing what this Russian woman had in the way of quote.
And did not report it, as I think everybody who's in politics knows it's something you should do. Should the American people be grateful that in the face of our attack on our democracy by a foreign adversary, that the President of the United States made several documented attempts to thwart an investigation into the links between his campaigns and Russia? Use that word grateful again, that the American people should be grateful. Is that something we should be grateful for? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Sir, I'm talking about the attempts that this president made, that Mueller could point to at least 10 attempts to thwart an investigation into the links between this campaign and Russia. Should we be grateful for those 10 well-documented attempts by Mueller?
Are you talking about the obstruction part of the report?
I'm talking about the second volume, but let me continue. Should the American people be grateful that Trump had more than 215 documented contacts between Russian-linked operatives and then lied about them and tried to hide them? Is that something the American people should be grateful for any president, this one or any down the road?
As I mentioned earlier, during a campaign, foreign governments make and foreign citizens frequently make a lot of attempts to contact different campaigns. If we were right now to go and look at, for example, Hillary Clinton's campaign during the same time frame, then you would see a lot of foreign governments, Chinese, trying to establish.
And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say to you, sir, is that we right now have a new normal in our country. We have a document that shows over 200 connections between a presidential campaign and a foreign adversary, sharing information that would be illegal if we did it with a super PAC. We know that. But information was shared. Only data was shared, sir. It's in the report. I can cite you the page. And I guess my point is that your willingness to seem to rush over this and use words like the American people should be grateful with what's in this report, nobody should be grateful. Concerted efforts for deception, for misleading, inappropriate action after inappropriate action that is clear. And then on top of that, at a time that we all recognize that we had a foreign power trying to undermine our election, you, the chief law enforcement officer, not only undermines your own credibility as an independent actor, where there's ongoing investigation still, using the word president's own words, happily criticized by Mueller himself. But the challenge we now have is that we are going into an area where you seem to not even be willing to be in the least bit critical in your summarizations. I believe it calls for your credibility, and again, my time is up.
Senator Tillis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Barr, thank you for being here. In the last sentence on page 1 of your 4-page memo, it states that the special
Counsel issued more than 2,800 subpoenas, executed nearly 500 search warrants, obtained more than 230 orders for communication records, issued almost 50 orders authorizing the use of pen registers, made 13 requests to foreign governments for evidence, and interviewed approximately 500 people. That seems like a pretty extensive investigation. It took about 22 months, right?
Right.
And it was summarized in about a little over 400-page document. Volume 2 was just under 200 pages, as I recall. I've read Volume 2 word for word, and I've read most of Volume 1. The new normal that seems to be created here is even after all of this investigation, and you haven't found any conduct worthy of indictment, you can just bounce back for political reasons and indict somebody. That's a rhetorical statement or question, not a statement. Now we go back to the other part that I find interesting here. The New York Times already issued a headline that says, Mueller pushed in letter for Barr to release the report's summary. So now the narrative, because I've had a lot of people in the press coming out, and the narrative is, well, doesn't this undermine the Attorney General because Mueller wanted the executive summary issued? Now I want to go back to what you said in your opening statement. You said that, I believe, using your words, the body politic was unrestful. You got the report. You didn't get the 6E information. You had to do the redacting. You knew that was going to take time. It would have been helpful if you'd gotten that when the report was transmitted to you, and it took however long it took. You issued the summary. You used the analogy of announcing the verdict and waiting for the transcript. Did you ever at any point say, you know what I really want to do is issue this letter and then let the news media play with it for 3 or 4 weeks and then we'll get the redacted version out? Did that ever cross your mind?
No, we were pushing
to get it done as soon as possible.
To get the report out as soon as possible.
And at any point in time when the president had the opportunity to issue their own advice on redactions or assert executive privilege over the course of the weeks that you were doing the review of the report, did you ever get advice from the president or from anybody in the White House to assert executive privilege or to redact any portion of the document?
No.
None. And so the narrative between the letter and the redaction process was, we're going to get a report that's 80% redacted. Now, would you give me the numbers again on the version that's available to the leadership of Congress? The numbers again, I think you said 1 minute. We're skipping over Volume 1 and we're spending time on Volume 2. Did I hear you say that the legislative leaders have access to all but 1/10 of the entire report?
Approximately.
So, guys, you can go out and spend this any way you want to, but the data is there. There was no underlying crime, and there was insufficient evidence to indict the president on obstruction of justice. You said something else that's interesting to me in the report about that we found no evidence that was sufficient to indict. But then they went on to say, nor can we exonerate him. What is the special counsel in the business of exonerating a subject of an investigation?
They're not.
They're not. So why would somebody put something like that in the report?
I don't know.
And so it would follow, if that's uncommon, that you would not have actually included that in the summary before the full context of the report can be produced. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, but I did put in the sentence about not exoneration.
Yeah. I think that the thing that frustrates me, number one, I should have started by saying this, the vast majority of people in the Department of Justice and the FBI are extraordinary people. The chairman is right. Starting with Strzok and Page and everybody else leading up before the investigation, I hope they're being investigated. I have a question for you. The scope of the OIG, do you understand or do you know what the scope of that report will be? Will it be purely on this investigation or would it extend to all other acts that may have in some way influenced this investigation?
Well, I don't want to be too specific. I talked to Mike Horowitz a few weeks ago about it, and it's focused on the FISA, the basis for the FISA and the handling of the FISA application.